Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this meeting of the Education, Libraries and Localism Cabinet Panel. Gosh, it seems a long time since we had one of these, and indeed it was. So to start, if I could just make a couple of comments for the benefit of members. If you wish to speak, please go to the meeting chat column and type in speak, and I will take people as I see them indicating that they wish to speak. When it comes to voting, if you can also go to meeting chat column and vote for, against or abstain, and that's all we need. Can I ask please that you refrain from making comments or engaging in any discussion within the meeting chat column, and reserve it simply to indicate that you want to speak or for voting. I also now have to read the following announcement. Attendance at this meeting for COVID-19. Due to the coronavirus pandemic, the Council will be holding this meeting electronically in accordance with the relevant regulations. Members of the public may also attend this meeting in an electronic capacity, and there is a link on the Council's website for them to do so. Members of this meeting are asked to keep their microphones and cameras switched off until called to speak, and to switch their microphones and cameras off once they have finished speaking. To indicate that they wish to speak, they should request so by using the members chat function, as I've just mentioned. At the end of the debate of each item of business, there will be a vote. Members, again, as I've mentioned, should vote using the meeting chat button by indicating for, against or abstain. I will declare the result after each vote. Officers are in attendance but will keep their cameras and microphones switched off unless they are called to speak. If we need to, breaks will be incorporated into the meeting as appropriate. But I am aware, of course, that if we were at County Hall and in a physical meeting, we would not normally take a break, but we'll see how we get on from there. I would also just mention that I may possibly vary one of the items later on, which will be the local outbreak plan, because I am aware that Sue Matthews has another commitment, and if we have got to a stage where we can't give that the appropriate time, I will move that forward in the agenda. I'm now going to invite the members just to say who they represent, or which party they represent and which division they represent, and I'm going to start from the list that I have on the agenda with Judy Billing.
Good morning, my name's Judy Billing. I represent Hitchin North division as a county councillor. I'm leader of the Labour group and its spokesperson on education, libraries and localism.
Thank you, Judy. Annie Brewster.
So hello, you can see me, yes. I'm Annie Brewster. I represent Harpenden Rural, and I'm Deputy Executive Member for Public Health and Prevention.
Caroline Clapper.
Good morning, I'm Caroline Clapper. I represent Watling Division and I'm a Conservative councillor.
And I'm Terry Duris. I chair this. I am the Executive Member for Education, Libraries and Localism, and my division is Bridgewater. Nick Hollinghurst. Not sure that Nick is here. Thank you. Nick is not here at the present time. Jeff Jones.
Yes, good morning. Good morning. I'm Jeff Jones. I'm the member for Buntingford, the Conservative member, and obviously a member of this cabinet panel.
Asif Khan.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Asif Khan. I'm a member of North Watford, and the Labour Party County Councillor.
Mark Mills-Bishop.
Yes, good morning, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, everybody. Mark Mills-Bishop, Conservative member for Francis End and Turnford, and I am Vice Chairman of this panel. Mr. Chairman, at an appropriate stage, I will need to do a declaration of interest, non-pecuniary.
Okay, at the appropriate stage. Alan Plancy.
I'm Alan Plancy, and I'm the Conservative representative of Borehamwood South and a member of this panel.
Anthony Rowlands.
Anthony Rowlands, I'm a Liberal Democrat member for St Albans East.
Richard Thake.
Good morning, Richard Thake, Nebworth and Codicut Division Conservative Councillor.
Mark Watkin.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Mark Watkin. I'm the Lib Dem member for Nascot Park in Watford, and I am the opposition spokesperson for education, libraries and localism.
And if we move to apologies, we have apologies from Michael Hearn, who is in his place is Francis Button at very last minute. I don't believe that Francis Button has actually been able to join us at this time, so I'm sure she will in due course, as I'm sure Nick Hollinghurst will in due course. So can I remind members that if you have any disclosable pecuniary interests or declarable interests, to mention them at the beginning of that particular section. Come now to item 1, minutes. Can I invite you all to agree the minutes of the previous meeting, that meeting held on the 5th of February 2020? If you could type for, against or abstain in the meeting chat.
Where is the meeting chat?
You can't get to it.
I haven't got a meeting chat.
It's the conversation.
No. Show conversation. There. Type a message. Is this what you want?
Yes. I think we can take that Democratic Services folks as an overall agreement. Just wait for confirmation of that fact. Yeah, thank you very much indeed. We come now to public public petitions. There are none. So moving on to item 3, to recap on the planning and support offered to date, including the planning guidance for the term. This is going to be presented by Simon Newland, and he has a presentation which he will bring up as he goes through. So Simon.
Yes, good morning, everybody. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Chairman. Just introduce myself. I'm the Operations Director for Education. And I'm going to have to ask Caroline to kind of flip through my presentation because on my iPad, I can't take control of it remotely. So we have set up for you this morning 4 presentations, starting with my overview and then moving to specific presentations from Andrew de Chillery, Hearts for Learning, Catherine Tallis, Hearts for Learning, and Tanya Rule and Sue Matthews, that's Education and Public Health, to cover actually quite superficially the spectrum of things that we have been doing in support of the Education Service over the last 6 to 8 months. So I thought I'd start off with the priorities that we've been working to. And these have, the relative significance of them has changed a little bit over time, but they are all still valid. And the first one has been supporting the wider response to the pandemic in the county. And that in the early stages was focused on helping and enabling schools to remain open for the children of key workers. That's workers in the health service and a range of other key workers. And that was important to allow those critical services to continue to operate. And we have received, in fact, letters of thanks from the health service in relation to what we've done there. So they're supporting the response to the pandemic, and it was initially the key workers. Now it's much more the supporting and working on outbreak control, outbreak management. And Tanya and Sue are going to talk in more detail about how the education component of that later this morning. So there's the wider responsibility. The second area of priority is to mitigate the impact of the coronavirus and the school closures on pupils generally, and particularly those who are vulnerable and those with the HCPs. And again, I'm sure you're aware that early on our priority was to keep schools open for vulnerable children and children with the HCPs. We are now moving on to how do we help those children in particular, but also all children move back comfortably and confidently into school, and to start to address the challenges of lost learning that they will find there. So our third priority is to support institutions then in the mechanics of reopening, but also in the recovery of lost learning and the support they need to deliver, the additional support they need to deliver to children. And that's an area which Andrew is going to cover in more detail in his presentation. And Catherine Tallis will also cover to some degree in the context of the work that we're doing with schools to enable remote learning to continue successfully if we run into another lockdown and either whole or partial. Later on the agenda, we're also talking about transport, and that has been a very substantial challenge, as you will find from the paper. And Jane Avery is here to talk about that. And then lastly, one of our other priorities has been to reassure both parents and pupils about the safety of the institutions that they're coming back to. And of course, running through all these priorities has been a theme of safety. So can we move on one then, now, please, Caroline? As we all know, the education world is one in which there are many stakeholders and partners, most particularly schools and their representatives, who have really been the focus for our work in the last 6 to 9 months. But when I say our, within the County Council, working on mainstream schooling, there's Tanya Rall and one other person. So in practice, our work has very substantially been managed through Hearts for Learning. And Andrew again later will talk about some of the specific things that HFL have done. We have also tied together other HCC services, that's public health, our SEND colleagues in the Integrated Service for Learning team, and other children's services, particularly in relation to children with social workers. So there's a spectrum of HCC services that have been tied into this around both infection and vulnerable children. Again, as you can imagine, the RSC and the Department for Education are very substantially engaged in this programme with us. And I suppose they've had two major roles. One is in funding, and the other one is the guidance and the regulatory framework that they've created within which we've worked. But at the moment we report to the DfE through the RSC on a daily basis as to which schools are open and the performance. We're jumping around a bit. And the trade unions was the last one I wanted to mention. We have the trade unions are legitimately interested in the welfare and the safety of their staff members in the schools. And I think it's been helpful for us to work quite closely with them in communicating what we're doing. Next slide, please, Caroline. So the way we've done this is when the lockdown commenced, we began to issue guidance and support documents, which ran to about 50 pages for each phase. And they were links to other guidance, and that was about how you manage the schools for key workers and vulnerable children. We moved on to creating a short-term plan by phase, which we issued in May to help the primary schools with their reopening. A medium-term plan around what was going to happen in September and the recovery process, and we were working on that from June, and it went out to schools before the end of term. And we will in due course do a long-term plan. So there's a kind of planning structure that we're working within. But one of the features of the outbreak is that the amount of guidance that schools and other people have received is colossal, and always changing as circumstances change. So it's really very difficult for individual schools to keep track of what it is that they're supposed to be doing. And therefore, a critical thing that we have done is to supplement the written guidance with human faces, if you like, with face-to-face contact points for every school. And that's been run through Hearts for Learning and the school improvement partners, the Hertfordshire Improvement Partners. But we've also done this via a public health helpline, which you'll be aware of, and by the work that Tanya and immediate colleagues have done in making themselves available to schools. So we've put out that advice and guidance, and there's all that face-to-face availability of support to schools. I wanted to mention three other work streams. One is the infection control and the local outbreak plan and management work stream, which as I said, Tanya will talk about in more detail. There's transport, which is a thing in itself, and then there's communications and the way in which that ties back to the priority I talked about earlier in relation to parent and pupil confidence. So we've done webinars for young people, and a lot of material has gone out to parents with a particular focus on looking at those groups who we think might be most concerned within the Black and ethnic minority community. Can we have the next one then, please, Caroline? Yeah, so how did it work? Well, I think we had, for key workers and vulnerable children, we had around 4,500 in school in May before primary schools resumed. That's about 3.5% of the primary roll. So we were able to make sure that every parent who was a key worker had a school place available to them, either in their school that their children always go to, or in the cases when that wasn't possible for various reasons, then in other schools. So we did, I think we can be pleased that we and our colleagues in schools managed to achieve that. The next major milestone was the primary return from lockdown in June, and by the start of the second week of that return, over 99% of our primary schools were open for the year groups they were supposed to receive. And that compares with a 70% figure nationally. So again, I think great credit to our schools colleagues in the primary phase for their work in making sure that virtually every Hertfordshire child who was entitled to provision received it. And then we had a good response to the further extension of opening in July. And for September, we expect all our schools to be open. That's to be open today. We know quite a number opened on Thursday and Friday, but normally they don't all open until this week. So we're expecting all schools to be open and to be fully open. And the signs from last week, late last week, is that the attendance in our secondary schools, those that were open, was about 97% of entitled pupils. And that is, that's what one would expect for this time of the year. So in the secondary phase, there's no evidence at the moment that parental concerns are leading people to keep their children at home. So that's reassuring against what I think was a perceived risk factor early in the epidemic. And in the primary phase, it's more like 94, 95%, 96%, 99% in some cases. We're not quite sure yet whether there is any parental concern that's leading people to keep children at home. It's clearly only a couple of percent if it exists, but again, a couple of percent is a lot of children. So we need to do some further work on the data this week to establish with schools whether there are parents with particular concerns in any numbers, how we address that through our attendance processes with our schools, and indeed comms and other reassurance. I think it's fair to say that special schools and ESCs, Education Support Centres, have faced particular challenges through the COVID period. It's harder for them to accommodate all their pupils with safety for everybody. And I think, again, we'll need to see how things go this week. But the process that we have is regular interaction with all of those special schools so as to offer them the advice and support they may need to be fully open. And at the same time, if you like, from the pupil end of the process, Joe Fisher and my colleagues in Integrated Services for Learning have been in touch with schools saying, let us know if there's any child with an EHCP who is not in school, and we can work out how and if we should address that with the parents and the pupils and the schools. So overall, I think a pretty favourable picture so far in terms of mitigating damage. Of course, there is damage to children's education, undeniably, but we are seeking to mitigate it. The question we often get asked is, well, how good has the remote learning been that pupils have received over this period of time? Have some of them been unable to access it? What are you going to do about that? And I think the straight answer on that is that during the lockdown period to date, there is no way of getting systematic quantitative information on how good the provision has been that's been offered. What we have done is to make sure that we've tried to help schools from the start with their remote delivery, and that the quality of that help and the quality of what they ought to be able to deliver should continue to rise. And again, that's a particular focus of Catherine's presentation. So can we move on then, Caroline, please? Yeah, looking to the future. Yeah, there's how do pupils pick up the curriculum, if you like? How do schools identify where the gaps in learning are? How do they address them? How do they bring the national tutoring offer into play as far as it's useful to particular schools? The whole spectrum of emotional well-being and mental health problems and things involved in trying to get pupils to re-engage in learning. So there's a set of recovery issues there. I've talked about the mitigating the impact of future lockdowns. And I think the concern for me is not so much that we will return to the kind of April situation in which every school is locked down. It's that through the next 3 to 6 months, some schools may be locked down, some year groups may be quarantining, some pupils may be self-isolating for a fortnight. There will be a kind of a whole load of little impacts on pupils' learning, which the quality of remote learning that's available will help to mitigate that. And again, that's been our priority. I won't talk further about infection control, but I did want to mention actually that Ofsted, obviously having suspended school inspections, is going back into schools to visit some of them this autumn, and the focus of their visits which are not intended to be linked to the performance assessment of schools. But the focus of their visits is going to be around how well have schools managed the return, how well are pupils picking up the curriculum, how well is remote learning organised, how are schools using national funding, all the sets of things that we've been working on. And I suppose it's obvious in a sense, but to start to make an offer to schools in September means that we needed to start work in June, and that work has been pretty intense over the summer period. Next, please, Caroline. Yeah, and next after this as well, please. Move on to another one. I wanted to talk a little bit we wanted to talk a little bit particularly about well-being and emotional well-being and mental health. And can I just hand over to Tanya to talk through this slide, as it's an area where she's had a particular involvement.
Yes, thank you, Simon. Hello. So this is a initiative that has come from the Department of Education, Department of Health and Social Care, that is complementing significantly what the local authority is already doing. So the element that's coming from the Department for Education and Social Care is a grant to support the emotional well-being of students on their return to education, in recognition of just how emotional well-being may well have been adversely affected for a number of students, following the pandemic and significant absence from school. We have brought together to manage this work. It's £198,000, which is specifically to deliver training to all state-funded schools, regardless of the type of schools, whether it's an academy, a free school, or a local authority-maintained schools. To materials that have been brought together by the Department for Education and Health and Social Care, which we will adapt to the Hertfordshire context, but it's to deliver training to all those schools who then can support their young people in supporting their emotional well-being returning to education. There is no requirement to report back on what we've spent that money on, which is quite important and useful, I think, but we have pulled together a multidisciplinary steering group, which is across all the wellbeing sectors. So education psychologists, colleagues from ISL, colleagues from public health, and colleagues from education, and colleagues from Hearts for Learning, who will ultimately be delivering this training to our schools. To ensure that we are directing this and when we receive the training materials from the Department for Education, which we expect this week, that they're adapted for our particular context for our young people and particularly in particular areas. Additionally, there is a range of support that the local authority is already has already developed and is providing to young people, and I know I'm going to forget a number of these areas, but one of the other things we wanted to use the money on is making sure, that's all very, it's signposted very well now, but we want to make sure that schools have access to very clear signposting of all that's on offer, because there's a very comprehensive range of services available. So one of the things we're going to be looking to do, making sure that signposting for all that support is in place. You will be aware of some of the support that we have going forward already in terms of the education psychology. I can't say that word today. Education psychologists, where we have a really strong number of colleagues out there working directly with schools and have direct contacts with schools. We have YC Heart, Safe Space and Families First, and that funding will just help make sure that all our schools are aware of what's on support. The EP team have already done a lot of work here, and I just wanted to touch on the work that they have been doing with our young people. You would have been aware of the young people surveys that came from YC Hearts, but the EP team has been following up on that, and they've produced 3 documents already over the spring and summer terms for both young people in school, but staff that are in school as well, who, you know, let's not forget, their emotional well-being would have been affected over this period of time. And one of those documents is about looking after your emotional well-being. One is about transition, so the transition from schools, going up to secondary school, nursery going up to primary school, because that is a significant factor that could cause anxiety for young people during this lockdown period, and general well-being for students and staff. They have also launched via YouTube, actually, a training model which has been commissioned by CAMS, and the training model is on bereavement and loss. So it's supporting teachers to support young people on bereavement and loss, and for staff as well. So that's how we're bringing together that funding from central government and using it to augment what we already have, and what we're already delivering, and some of the things we're already on the front foot on, and making sure that all our schools have access to everything that's currently on offer, and have the training and know-how how to support their pupils. And I'll hand back to Simon.
Yeah, thank you, Tana. Just 2 more slides now. We could move on one, Caroline, please. Yeah, I think it was worth drawing to your attention the financial side of things. I mean, the direct additional cost to HCC of what we've been doing is fairly small scale in mainstream schools, of the order of a couple of £100,000 in work and support we've commissioned. Transport is a different matter, and transport potentially looked as though it was going to be very expensive and still has the potential to be so. But so far, the direct cost has been fairly limited. Of course, there's an indirect cost, which is that Tanya and myself and other colleagues are spending more or less all our time on this and no time on anything else. Schools themselves, there's a certain amount of complaint about financial pressure, but not it's not a dominant concern at the moment, and schools have received from the government an additional £80 per pupil over the coming academic year to deal with some of those additional costs. And I think actually that one needs to put the costs of COVID for schools in the context of other schools' funding changes and the way in which money is moving around the school system from some schools to others. And actually those changes, I think, are more significant for losing schools than they are than COVID is. And I suppose I should say also that one of my main concerns about the impact on schools as institutions as opposed to pupils, which is what it's all about. But one of our main concerns about schools as institutions is the amount of pressure that this places on the management capacity of schools. So it's overlaid on top of what was already a difficult task, the whole set of challenges around opening institutions, and then the other huge set of challenges around how do you help children to recover from the impact of lost learning. So I think it's going to be very, very difficult for schools in the next year, the next 2 years, 3 years, and that they will not be able to do all the things that they would like to have done. So final slide, please, Caroline. Yeah. Oh, that's it. Just a thank you. So yeah, thanks very much. I mean, I think I'll be guided by you in terms of questions, but where there are things that I think will be covered in more detail in subsequent presentations, I'll kind of suggest that we put those questions back to be asked later in the meeting.
Yes, thank you, Simon. You members will of course be aware that there are a number of other presentations to make. So if we can contain the questions and any comments to this particular one. Just before I come to the questions, I know that we've had 2 declarations of interest. So for the wider watching and listening public, declaration of interest from Mark Mills Bishop saying that his wife is a teacher at a primary school in Broxbourne, son is a head teacher of a primary school in Welwyn Hatfield, and he is the director of Dame Alice Owen's School, Potters Bar. I've also had a declaration from Richard Thake, making a declaration that his wife is Chair of Governors at St Ifflit's JMI School, and that he, Richard, is a governor of Hitchin Boys School and North Harts Educational Support Centre. So having noted those, and I think they will apply to all the items on the agenda and that are relevant to that. Judy Billing, I'll come to you first, if I may, and then I will come to Mark Watkin after that.
Thank you, Terry. Hadn't thought to do so, I'm afraid, but I will now declare that I have a daughter who's a Year 6 teacher at Whitehill School in Hitchin, which had a delightful visit last Thursday from Sir Keir Starmer, who spoke to children about their experiences of going back to school. I wanted to say that in the beautiful ancient market town of Hitchin in North Hertfordshire, it's absolutely lovely to see children in their excellent new uniforms going to school and clearly being happy to do so. Although there are still quite a lot of nervous parents, there are more, I would think, who are so glad not to be having to deal with homeschooling, which many found extremely difficult indeed. But I do wonder when we will know what sort of increase, if any, there is in parents formally deciding to homeschool their children, because I'm hearing that nationally there is some uptake. I guess we won't know immediately, but I'm just really asking Simon if he can say when we will have some sort of data for that eventuality across Hertfordshire.
Simon?
Can I hand that over to Tanya, because she was in correspondence with the RSC about this yesterday.
Yes, thank you, Simon. In conversations with colleagues in who manage in ISL, who manage the electric home education applications, we have seen an increase in inquiries in September from August, which is fairly typical. It is too early to tell at this stage whether the inquiries will first turn into actual applications and whether it's COVID related. There's generally an uptake in inquiries at this time of the year if parents don't get their first choice of school, or for example, but it is too early to tell at the moment when we might know whether any increase exists and whether it's COVID related. We will probably know in the next few weeks, but I'll confirm what the timing is on that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Judy. Just before we move on, I believe that Francis Button has joined us. So Francis, can you just introduce yourself and say which division you represent, please?
Yes, indeed. I'm just playing with the on-off switch. Yes, I'm so sorry that I wasn't here. I could say I got caught in traffic to start with, but not sure that's right. I'm Francis Button. I represent Rickmansworth East and Oxley Park, which includes Carpenter's Park, Oxley Hall and Moore Park. And thank you for inviting me along as a sub. I've been online for quite a long time now, so I was.
And you are substituting for Michael Hearn. Thank you. Right, moving along, Annie Brewster.
Yes. Thank you very much.
Oh, sorry, I'm sorry, Annie. Mark Watkin.
Right, okay, Mark, go.
Sorry, Mark.
No, that's fine. I would happily let Annie lead. It's no great deal to me. First of all, can I just add some comments? I think that the the Hearts for Learning and indeed the education team did an excellent job over the months of trying to get some sense out of what was coming out of the Department for Education almost daily and seeming to be conflict, one message with the next. And I think they were a wonderful, I mean, I'm going to be very significantly praiseworthy of them. I think they did an excellent job at synthesizing down to some clear statements of what schools should be trying to do. I raised a concern in that period, and I want to just find out how it's changed. In the period that before we've now come to this term, the way schools educated their children varied absolutely according to the circumstances relating to that school. No problem with that in principle if they had to do what they had to do. Some schools opened, you know, all classes. In fact, one school did open all classes, one of my primary schools in my division, one to all years for 1 day a week, so that they did keep in touch with their teachers, whereas another school said, no, it has to be done according to people who apply. So what I'm trying to understand now is when we use the term all schools are open, what exactly are we saying? Are we saying now there is a consistent offer across schools at each age group, so that effectively there isn't any kind of, well, my child's getting 5 days full teaching and another parent next door saying, well, I'm only getting 3 days. And if that is different, when do we hope to see some consistency about the delivered product? And just in passing, Simon is going to, I imagine at some point, have a reference to a conversation about what's happening with children with education healthcare plans, and are they getting the support they need now in the new setup. It's something I've been in discussion with him, and he said he would bring it into his delivery at some point today. That's all. Thank you.
Mark, I'm not going to resist Simon in answering all of your questions, but I think that to some extent children with EHCPs probably fall within the Children's Services panel, but see where it goes. And Simon, can you respond to all of those?
Yeah, in terms of the variability of approach, it was the case that schools had varying approaches, and sometimes that was based on really clear factors that made them vary their approaches, and sometimes it was local discretion. And where we thought that that was particularly disadvantageous to pupils, then we were in contact with those head teachers and schools to say, no, we really need to, we think you really need to change what you're doing. For this term and the coming year, we expect, like the government, that every school will be open for every pupil for all the sessions that they're entitled to. In other words, 5 days a week. Just at the moment, their schools have historically slightly staggered or phased the intake of some groups of pupils. Nursery pupils or reception pupils, for example, may start a few days later than other pupil groups. So we're not too concerned about that. It is the case, though, that some schools are looking at, for example, early closing on Friday afternoons, and that's something that, unless there are very, very particular reasons behind it, we would be uncomfortable with. So as we move towards the end of this week and next week, we will be in touch with every school that appears to be departing from the normal pattern to check with them why that is, whether there's any support we can offer to them, and what their plans are for recovery. And I know that the Regional Schools Commissioner for some academies is taking the same line. So that's the variability issue. On EHCPs, there is no reason why children with EHCPs should receive a service which is any worse than it would otherwise have been, in theory. I think we need to recognise the comment that I made earlier on about the scale of the management pressure on schools at the moment to reopen for everybody and to recover everybody's learning. So they are under a lot of pressure from a lot of different directions. But the other positive, I think, is that we're introducing from this September our new system of additional funding for children with complex needs in mainstream schools. So the amount of resource flowing into supporting those pupils in mainstream in particular is substantially increasing. So one would hope that their experience will be as good as, if not better than it might have been in previous years.
Okay, thank you, Simon. Annie.
Yes. Thank you very much, Chair. Yeah, Simon, congratulations for the excellent comprehensive work presented here, and in the subsequent presentations we're going to see is a great level of detail. So thank you for that. But one aspect I didn't notice mentioned in the presentations we've seen is what influence sixth form or college tutors or similar might be able to have and be supported in to enforce a message that gatherings outside of school can jeopardise all this work and set everyone backwards. I know in public health we're able to send out letters to various licence holders and that sort of thing, but clearly, as we heard last night on the news, this is a really urgent issue. So I wondered whether we can help or how we can help in that way. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, it really is a very hot topic. And what I suggest is we hold that question and that Tanya and Sue Matthews pick it up in their presentation, because they will be talking in that presentation about how we're dealing with public health messaging. So it's a really very important question, Annie, and one that I think we'll give some airtime to later on.
And I think that at this point I should say that, bearing in mind the reference I made earlier on to Sue Matthews having another appointment a little later on, which would mean that she would have to leave at 11:40, I'm proposing that we will bring forward item 6, the local outbreak plans, to follow this particular item, because it seems as though it could be a sensible way to go. So, and that will help Sue in her arrangements. We move now to Anthony and then Caroline. Anthony?
Thank you, Terry. Just couple of quick comments. I think Simon's presentation has been excellent. It's difficult to underestimate the burden that has fallen on school managers, and we're clearly grateful to them for everything they're doing. I think delighted to hear, and I think it's really important that, as it were, Hearts for Learning and council officers have provided a human voice for schools to approach when they've got questions, because the plethora of guidelines must have left a lot of people in schools pretty bewildered. My question is this: it does link to the Wellbeing for Education reform slide from Tanya, and I think it is it's an education one, maybe also a children's services one. But Tanya, can you just tell us a little bit about where the mental health support teams project has reached in terms of the interim period when schools were basically closed?
Hi, Anthony. I'm afraid I can't give an update on that. That would have to be my colleagues in the mental health support team. My update was around the specific grant factor and how we're pulling in all the other support that the local authority is already offering. But what we can do is get an answer back to you.
I'll be very grateful if you could, and I may raise that at Children's Services, because obviously, Terry, it's a linked concern about mental health and wellbeing in schools.
Yeah, and I think probably the Children's Services panel is possibly a slightly more appropriate place to raise it, but it's fine that you should raise it today as well. Yes, thank you, Anthony. Let's move to Caroline Clapper, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. Firstly, thank you, Simon, for the excellent presentation, and thank you to you and all the officers for all the hard work that you've undertaken. My question, you may want to cover when you talk about the local outbreaks, but as I'm sure you're aware, we've had some very specific spikes in my division, in my area, Hertsmere. And I know that there's quite a differentiation between the schools in my area of some who are doing class bubbles and some who are doing year bubbles. And I was just wondering if you and your officers had a particular view of what you would be recommending schools should be doing, and what would be working most effectively to keep keeping them up and running as we move forward? Thank you.
I mean, I think it does depend, and of course Tanya and Sue may want to elaborate on this. It depends on the circumstance of each individual school. The general guidance to primary schools is that they should operate class bubbles, and the general guidance to secondary schools is that it's reasonable for them to operate year bubbles. But of course, it depends on how a secondary school organises its teaching. So if it organises its teaching in such a way that one half year doesn't have any contact with another half year, then it's reasonable to have half year group bubbles. So I wouldn't say that we have a definitive view. What we do though is provide advice to schools through James Ottery and public health colleagues on their particular circumstances if they want to get an opinion from us as well.
I think that one of the things that schools, one of the roles that schools have is to impress upon their students of all ages the importance of the social distancing, the separation, the hand sanitizing, the care that they must exhibit, because a lot of these incidents have not occurred in schools, so far as I'm aware. They've occurred as part of involving school children, but they have occurred outside school in social gatherings, etc. And I think that's one of the things that schools really have to probably with a level of sympathetic nature, but they really do have to impress upon their children and their students the importance of safety. I haven't got any other questions. The only comment that I think I would make is that I would reiterate what has been said in terms of recognising the work that colleagues in the Education Department have done since March, when to some extent at the beginning of March there was this sort of almost tsunami approaching, and you thought, my goodness, how's that all going to work out? And they have worked incredibly hard. There's a lot of information that has been in the public domain that's come out, but equally there's been a huge amount of information that has gone directly to schools in terms of frequently asked questions on the grid and so on, supporting school managers, teaching staff and additional staff as well. So it is just incredible the amount of information that has gone out, and I think I would want to add my appreciation to everything that's been said in recognising the work. So we do come to a recommendation, which is that members are invited to note and comment on the content of the presentation. I think you've commented in terms of your questions, and would you now please vote for, against or abstain? And I think I'm right in saying, I don't know, but I think well, certainly we have a majority, and I think that it's probably unanimous. And if it is, then thank you all very much indeed for that. Can we change the order now, if please? And can we go to item 6 on the agenda, which is the local outbreak plans, and you've already heard from Tanya, the head of school standards and accountability. But can I also ask Sue Matthews, the consultant in public health, to introduce herself and for them to make their presentation, please? Start with Tanya.
Hi, sorry, I'm just trying to pull up my presentation. My name is Tanya Rule. I am the head of school standards and accountability in the education management team, and Sue and I wanted to present this presentation together. Because we think, because we've been working very closely together, the health protection team and ourselves have been working very closely together to support schools in supporting them for the local outbreak plan. I'm being slightly distracted by the order of my slides, so I'm going to hand over to Sue to introduce herself, just as I try and get the slides correct. Sorry.
I apologise if I came to you prematurely.
That's okay. Let me just work on making sure I've got the right slides. Forgive me for a moment.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Sue Matthews. I'm a consultant in public health. My normal portfolio pre-COVID was children and young people, healthy places and sexual health. But now I'm leading on a public health lead for schools and schools and children's provision and high-risk settings and workplaces for the local outbreak plan, which is online at the moment. And as I said, Tanya and I have been working very closely together on this. I think Tanya's going to start the presentation.
Yes, I'm still struggling with getting the right slide up, and I'm going to stop presenting and just quickly check why it's not coming up. So just bear with me one moment. Let me try and it's all there. It's all open. I don't. Right, Caroline, I'm going to stop presenting. Caroline, would you mind bringing up the, she has it ready to run. Would you mind bringing it up, because I'm having technical difficulties?
Just whilst that is being dealt with, I'm told that 3 members didn't vote last time. Now, if you chose not to vote, that's absolutely fine. If you experienced an issue, can you perhaps just put a note in the meeting chat, experienced an issue, and the folks in Democratic Services will try and sort it out for you.
Terry, can I just come in here? My chat isn't working, I've realised. I'm putting in information, nothing's coming back. So I'm probably one of those people.
Okay.
Everything else seems to be working except the chat. I've just sent you a message as well on chat, and that obviously didn't get through. So I'm going to log out and log back in. It's very strange. I don't know why.
Okay, and if not, if you send Elaine Manzi an email,
Okay.
she'll probably, they may be able to help you through as well.
Okay, thanks, Terry.
Terry, Richard Thake. I think I've seen this happen before with another authority, and what was done then, and it worked quite well, is that the majority of us who had chat working responded on chat, but the chairman allowed those who did not have that facility to respond verbally.
Yeah, okay. Well, I can do that. I don't want everybody to respond verbally, but if there's Jeff and Richard, do we know who the third one is? Do anybody want to admit to being the third one? Maybe not. Okay.
Terry, I'll have to do the same if I want to speak as well, because obviously I can't put that message in the chat.
Yeah.
So apologies, I'll just have to butt in and say, could you put me on the list?
Okay.
Thanks.
It's the easiest way, Chairman, of dealing with a problem that a few members have got.
Yeah.
Well, there was only 3 members that didn't, so we'll just carry on. And I think that intervention has allowed the presentation to come up on the screen. So is it Sue or Tanya who's?
So I'm going to hand over to Sue for the first part of the presentation, and then take over and for the second half.
Okay.
Right, so I just thought it'd be useful to give you an idea of what the schools and children's provision workstream covers. And as you can see, it covers a lot of ground. So we include within it all early years providers, primary schools, secondary schools, special schools, and FE colleges, children's homes, and children's supported accommodation. So there's a lot of settings which the workstream covers. The reason for putting it all together was because there is obviously a lot of crossover. We want to share good practice, we want to share learning, and I think it works really well. If we move to the next slide, just to give you a summary of the objectives of the workstream. There's a strong prevention element within the work stream, and we've done a lot of work on that, and we'll talk through that. And minimising spread of the virus. So that's really about, as soon as we hear about a case, we act promptly, and those kind of isolation, cleaning, etc., will prevent us from getting outbreaks. So there's a strong focus on that. And then really it's a lot of work around communications, both in terms of prevention but also support. And I know Tanya's on the phone every day to someone in a school, really supporting them, and the same applies across the rest of children's services. We're really trying to provide that support because we do recognise that this has been a really challenging time for for all settings really. Because it's we are dealing with something which we're learning about every day. Next slide. So I just thought it'd be useful for you to see the membership of our work stream. We meet weekly. We meet on a Thursday, and so we have representation from public health, children's services, health and safety. And we now have someone from an FE college, which has been really useful, and communications as well, and transport. So it hopefully covers most angles. Do you want to do the next slide? So I just thought it'd be worth going through each of the objectives and just give you a really quick summary of what's been going on. I think this has been quite challenging because there has been there's so much going on. We have had to prioritise what we're doing, and when I think we do all recognise that there is still more to do, and we're working and we're learning as we go, and we're trying to improve things as we go along. But this is so far. There's been support given to educational and early years settings. So they've been given guidance, they've been given self-assessment checklists. They've done, there's been extensive communications. I think Tanya contacts them weekly. The self-assessments are very detailed, and they provide a lot of support and guidance around, how to set up schools, how to focus on, setting up the classrooms, all of that prevention work going on. So it's very detailed and it's on the grid. And comms have done a lot of work to adapt the Hertfordshire Play Your Part campaign and tailor it for schools and early years settings. And we've got some slides that will show you some examples of the posters coming up. There's also been some targeted communications for young adults, and we can talk a bit more detail later on around that. For children's homes, there's been training, support, and they have also undertaken risk assessments of their settings to look at, you know, how they set things up, the staff rostering, etc. And we've done exactly the same for the short break local offer. So that just gives you a bit of an idea around what we've done of prevention. Next slide, please. So in terms of the outbreaks, there's you all know about NHS test and trace. That's in place already. We've made it really clear. We've worked very closely with Public Health England, who work regionally, around making it clear about who does what the escalation processes are, what support we can give to schools and early years settings, so that everyone is really clear around what happens when there is a case within their setting, and there's clear escalation points. So I think in a few slides time you'll see some examples of pathways that have been established, and they have points of contact. Just so you're aware, in a school setting or any early years setting, as soon as a positive case is identified through the test and trace process, that will get escalated to Public Health England, because they would have put that the child or the adult attended a setting, and they would follow up with the head teacher or the manager, and then they would be advised following a risk assessment what to do. So I think that we do also have very clear process and routine communications to schools to encourage schools and early years settings to contact us if they know of a case, because I think what we've found is that sometimes the head teacher contacting us is quicker than waiting for it to go through test and trace. So we've got a bit of a belt and braces approach really with that. Next slide, please. So this is just an example of a flow chart that we have. That this one is for schools, and it's quite, hopefully it's quite clear. It tells you what to do if the child has symptoms, then when they get a positive or negative test result, and there are points of contact within that. I think the next slide shows a similar flow chart. So these are all on the grid, and the website is on the page. If you want to see them, we can always share them after the meeting, because it's quite hard to see on here. The next slide, please. Tanya, please tell me when you're due to come on, because I've lost the number of slides.
No, I'll jump in now.
Okay.
If you like. So some of the things that Sue has outlined in some of the earlier slides are, also repeat some of the actions that Simon outlined in his earlier presentation in terms of the support that we've been providing to schools. So the first part of the first objective about supporting schools and providing all the information that they need and the risk assessment was very much outlined just a couple of slides earlier. This is another flowchart that we have produced so internally, so for internal comms, so colleagues within both the education sector at the ISL and Hearts for Learning know who to contact should they be told of a case if a head teacher phones a HIP, a school improvement partner or something. So it's part of that about and braces approach, where we are both supplementing or augmenting the track and trace kind of aspect in terms of making sure that we can react quickly to schools should there be a case identified in the school, and supporting colleagues in those sectors that deal directly with school. Should they need to kind of check up on their knowledge and know who to talk to, they can direct the head teacher very clearly to the right person. Next slide, please, Caroline. So communication has been a really key factor in all of this, in terms of supporting schools to prepare for the stages of opening and full opening, and also providing reassurance in terms of what happens should there be an outbreak in schools. So it's been about communicating the plan. We have a really clear two-way communication system with head teachers, education settings, all education settings, the local authority and Public Health England, which is facilitated often via this school cell of the local outbreak plan. We have very prompt identification, escalation and management of risks. Sue mentioned that a little bit earlier. That's part of the bout and braces approach. We asked that schools, if they identify a case, they contact either both the education team and the COVID rota email address, and which is managed by public health colleagues, and that way we can really quickly respond to any queries or and provide advice and guidance, and escalate further up to PHE if we need to. And that's part of the support systems for all settings. Caroline, next slide, please. So this slide and the next couple of slides just outline some of the changes in the guidance for the autumn term, and I'm conscious that some of this may have already changed. So the local outbreak plan has been really focused, or the outbreak group has been really focused on supporting all the actions that we are doing more widely to support schools to open full time. It's through the sort of risk assessment process. This outlines kind of the reasons why the government has made the decision to open schools more fully. Cases of COVID-19 had reduced substantially. And the Office of National Statistics analysis on COVID-19 related deaths to occupations indicates that there is no greater risk for staff in education settings. And the evidence that children transmit the disease any more than adults do. And also the impact of how children necessarily don't get so severely ill if they contract COVID. The last bullet point was true. From the 1st of June 2020 until the end of the summer term, there were no declared outbreaks of COVID-19 in Hertfordshire schools or early years settings. An outbreak is 2 or more confirmed cases. Now, we will come on and talk about the recent outbreaks from the questions we would have done and for the questions that have been raised. But as Terry said, none of those outbreaks were transmitted in schools. It was outside schools, but we've been working very closely with schools. Caroline, next slide, please. And changes in guidance for the autumn term, clearly we need to be vigilant, and we are continuing that vigilance, and that vigilance has been heightened because of the recent cases in Dacorum and Hertsmere. And the guidance states schools need to implement a system of controls to create inherently safer environment. We've been supporting schools to do that. Schools are doing that, and we're continuing to offer that support. I think there will be some learning over the next few weeks, and we will be there to support schools to adapt systems and processes that they've put in place. Caroline, next slide, please. So the other key factor is as I've already mentioned, the communication aspect to schools. It's about reassurance. It's about signposting and identifying areas of support. So the Play Your Part campaign, which I'm sure you're all very familiar with, has had a schools and education setting slant. That's been really effective. We have provided an awful lot of documents to support to schools just before the autumn term opened. In particular, some really thorough presentation for their inset day, setting out kind of the key factors of, you know, the 5 principles of stopping the spread of virus, of important hand hygiene, social distancing, self-isolation if you are tested positive, and that was received really well by head teachers. It allowed them to have conversations with staff, because staff are obviously clearly concerned as well. Many of them haven't been back to school since the lockdown. We have also been working very significantly with transport teams. Colleagues in the transport team has been working really closely with schools, reassuring schools and organising additional school transport. We have been providing advice and guidance on lots of specific issues that have been arising, that we've been aware that have been arising over the summer terms, because we had a lot of learning over the spring and summer terms when there was partial opening of schools. So issues like temperature testing, we've been offering specific advice on that, and open letter to parents from Director of Public Health, which has gone out today, or just about to go out today. Next slide, please, Caroline. Part of the materials that we provided to schools alongside the inset materials is some posters, some downloadable posters that they can put up at areas in their schools for others to see. And this one is an example of a poster to put at the school gates about how important it is to wash your hands, keep your distance, drop off, and it's aimed for parents to, you know, drop off your children, then leave. Don't hang around the school gates and you know, risk passing on the virus by not socially distancing at the school gates, or causing an obstruction, and the isolate and get tested if you have symptoms. Next slide, please, Caroline. This is another example of an infographic for schools that's downloadable and put up because the government advice changed about wearing masks in predominantly secondary schools. So it's really important that schools and pupils and staff know how to safely wear a mask. So we provided this for schools to print out and put up on their walls. Next slide, please, Caroline. Okay. And this, we've just come to the final slide, and I think this is a point for conversation. So as of the end of August, this is the number of confirmed cases we had in schools. Now, that has changed. We have had the outbreak in Dacorum and the recent outbreak in Hertsmere. The positive things about that is it has effectively tested our systems of communication, the local outbreak school cell, and our systems of escalation, and we found they've been working really well. So that's really encouraging. And we have been working extremely well with PHE and other colleagues, and with head teachers and schools to support and manage these particular outbreaks. So that has been really, really assuring that the systems that we've been busy putting in place over the spring and summer holidays has been effectively managing those situations. We didn't anticipate using them so quickly, but it's really good that we've been able to to be aware that they are working well. There are some areas of learning which we are looking at, and part of that is in terms of communicating to schools and parents. So the both outbreaks in Dacorum and Hertsmere are been identified not in transmission in schools, but social gatherings outside schools, and it's mainly has been the A-level age students, so the 16 to 19-year-old student. In both cases, in fact, and that has made us aware that there's some additional communication to do around that, more generally and specifically to those particular outbreaks. So more generally, we are working on social media comms to target young people in particular. this is something that's also been picked up nationally, so there I am expecting a national campaign to follow soon as well, because this is not Hertfordshire specific. We have also so for the decorum outbreak, which is now it's reached its peak and is declining, so we think we have challenged that one. So one of the things I did with that one, I phoned around all the secondary head teachers and made sure that they were aware, talked through the messages they needed to give to their young people, because we really believe it's the schools that are the best placed people to have these conversations with young people about social distancing and the importance of social distancing, and things like not sharing vapes, drinks, and other things that young people may do. With the Hertsmere outbreak, which is looking to be larger than the decorum outbreak, we have upped that those messaging quite considerably, and we have written, and I have written to all schools in the area twice, alerting them to the issue, and it spans over not just the state sector but the independent sector as well. And an open letter went to parents from Jim McManus last night to the affected schools, in particular the schools that we know where there are cases, alerting parents to the need to encourage their children to socially distance, the risk of social gatherings and parties, and also detailing the sanctions that could be delivered if social gatherings were organised and did not meet current government guidance. Because we think this is a wider issue, that letter is also going out to all schools in the county today. It's a really strong, robust letter, and it's very informative, and sets out what the government guidance is on social gatherings and parties, quite specifically. So that is going out to all schools today. We are also working really closely with other local authorities that have also been affected by this particular Hertsmere outbreak. So Barnet, Harrow and Enfield, I think, to make sure that our messaging that we're putting out to our schools in Hertfordshire is also consistent with the messaging they're putting out. So there's been some really strong coordination and working with other local authorities in managing this, as has the communications I've been given to schools, including having one-on-one conversations and reassuring schools in terms of any kind of fear or anxiety they have about opening. I will rest there, I think. Sue, did you want to add anything to this particular?
Just before Sue might come back, Tanya, can I just ask or pick up a couple of questions that's been posted, one from Richard Thake and one from Anthony Rowlands, and one is, how is the letter from the Director of Public Health being delivered? And the other one from Anthony is, can we be sent the letter that's going out today?
Absolutely, you can be sent the letter. I will make sure that it goes to all this group. It's been sent, so I've sent it to all schools, asking schools to send it on to their parents, their parent body. We think that's probably the best conduit for parents to receive this letter, and it allows the schools to enforce their messages that they are giving to parents as well, because obviously they are a key communicator with the parents to make sure that we can encourage our young people to socially distance better.
Yeah, I think Tanya, probably, as Anthony's just popped up, it's probably worth sending it to all county councillors so that they're fully aware of it.
Absolutely.
And going back, and I will come back to Mark Watkin in a minute with his question. How's it being delivered? Is that one for Sue?
No, the letter's been delivered through schools, and schools will send it to the parent body. I think
is this the letter from the Director of Public Health?
Yeah. So I sent it to all schools for them to send on to their parent body to help also reinforce their messages, and it's gone to the independent sector as well as the state sector. So it's gone to all schools that are involved, and that's also a letter we'll share with the other neighbouring local authorities that have been affected, so they can use the same messaging.
Okay. So did you want to add anything before I come to another question?
No, just to really add that we have been also working closely with Bedfordshire, because they had they had this happen earlier in August, and a spike of cases with young people, and I think we saw the similar picture, they did manage to reduce the numbers through prompt action, which was really local contact tracing, advising self-isolation, and that's exactly the approach we've done. And they also did a lot of communications, which our comms team have linked in very closely with them. So I think they've demonstrated that this can be an effective approach. I suppose the other point to make is that it's really my involvement in it has shown me that the value of the local contact tracing, because I think they have got a lot more information from young people than the national test and trace process has, and I think that's an important point to kind of show us that it works. It really works.
Will you feed that back up the PHE chain?
Yeah, we have.
I thought you might. May I make one observation, and that is that there was a slide earlier on which was for school gates. And I've been to a few schools now since the beginning of term, and I think that we should possibly be saying to schools, you need to be putting these signs up at the school gate. They're saying, oh, they're in the school, but I think that we need to demonstrate, and the school needs to demonstrate to the wider public, that they're doing their bit. Not just in telling students that they need to be taking this extra care, but also demonstrating to the wider public who happen to go past the school that they need to be taking. It's almost potentially a free advertising board. And I don't think we should be shy on saying to the schools, you really have to do this. And having had that little mini rant, Mark Watkin, you have a question.
I do, thank you, Terry. And yes, I entirely support what you've just said. In the communication flow, I forget which slide it was, talks about members briefing. I noted there was no point where the opposition members of equivalents to Terry and in fact Teresa were included. Would it be possible to have myself and Judy, if you take the education side, to be part of that education or that information loop? And the other question was more specifically about the Hertsmere outbreak. I heard you mentioned, Tanya, local authorities neighbouring Hertsmere. You didn't mention Watford. Now, I don't know enough about this outbreak. Is it that it's not likely that children and families in Watford will be affected by it? Because obviously there's a very close overlap between the two, or very close relationship between the two authorities.
Mark, Watford is, yes, I have been writing to schools in Watford and the Bushy area. In fact, we know that there's some contacts in some of the Watford schools. The Hertsmere District Council have been involved. The District Council from Watford hasn't so much, but from the local authority perspective, obviously the communication flows go to schools from the Herts County Council, so that would be me. So the conversations are being had with those head teachers in those schools, and there's one school in that particular district that's been that's had more than a number of cases linked to this particular social gathering as well. So we have been working very closely with the Watford schools.
And we will have a look at whether there's an alteration to the briefing methods for members.
Thank you for both of those answers, by the way.
Yep, Tanya.
Yes, so I wanted to go back, if there's no other questions, to Caroline Clapper's question about bubbles earlier. About the size of the bubbles and what advice we're giving to schools about the size of the bubbles. Simon's answer was absolutely accurate. It really, schools are best placed to determine what the size of the bubbles should be. However, one of the things we are learning over the last few weeks, and schools will be also learning this, is some of the bubbles in some of the secondary schools are quite large. So if you get a positive case in one of those bubbles, you may have a lot of children being sent home to self-isolate for 2 weeks. And, you know, that may repeat itself for a number of times throughout the year, which obviously will impact on children's education. So one of the things, you know, this has come up only yesterday, in fact. So we will be thinking about that and working with schools. So that's something we will start to reflect upon and work with schools to see how we can support them to sort of manage this perhaps in a different way. And schools themselves, in particular secondary schools, will be who weren't open quite so to so many pupils as primary schools last term, will be adapting their systems as they go through the learning that open up in the first few weeks will bring.
Tanya, can I just ask a question on that? I think I know the answer, but just for clarification, have DfE given a new code for the register for children who are self-isolating?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thought they had.
Yes, they have. That was published. Oh gosh. The attendance guidance was published middle of August, so that's all codes have been given. Yeah. Thought
so. I'm not seeing any other questions or comments, and I'm conscious of the time, and it's a good thing, Sue, that we brought this item forward as we rightly should have done.
Thank you.
I believe that Nick Hollinghurst has now joined the meeting, but he will not be able to vote on this item because he hasn't been here for the whole debate. But if I could, and after this item, just so that you're prepared, we will go back to the back on track item 4, which will be Andrew De Chillery, his item. So can we come to the vote, please?
Sorry, sorry to interrupt. When Frances joined, you allowed her to introduce herself. Will you be doing the same?
Oh, sorry. All right. Yep. Nick, would you like to introduce yourself? I was going to do it before the next item, but never mind.
Okay. Nick Hollinghurst, County Councillor for Tring. Apologies. Bit of a public health thing here, and I got distracted. So apologies for not turning up on time.
Okay. Thank you, Nick, and welcome. Right, so Pete, we are asking people to vote. Thank you for reminding me, Mark.
Terry, that's a 4 from me.
That's a 4 from Jeff.
Yes.
Yep.
Thank you.
I think Richard Thake has voted yes. Alan Plancy's voted. Right, we have a majority in favour, so thank you all very much indeed. Thank you to Sue, and thank you to Tanya. We may very well hear more from Tanya in due course, I don't know, but let's now go back to the agenda on item 4 for the Back on Track programme for schools, and Andrew De Chillery, who is the Managing Director for Hearts for Learning. Perhaps you'd like to just introduce yourself and say a little bit, and then go into your presentation, please. All of these presentations, by the way, have been circulated prior to this meeting. They were circulated on Friday. Simon Newland's one was only circulated, I think, yesterday, but they are all available, and you will have had them by email, so you can actually go and peruse them at greater depth in your own time.
Terry, thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you for giving us the opportunity to speak today. As Terry said, I'm the Managing Director for Hearts for Learning. It is a pleasure to be able to speak to you today. I have to say that I would like to apologise that this presentation isn't being led by my education colleagues, in particular Rachel McFarlane. The work that we're talking about here has been delivered by all the teams across Hearts for Learning, but Rachel and Tracy and Murray have been very much at the forefront of that. They are actually leading a training session today with the Hertfordshire, all of the HIPs from across Hertfordshire, and that is absolutely critical for going forward. So we agreed that I would lead this presentation with you today while they focused on the work with the teams on the ground. So I hope you'll understand that. If there are any questions you have that I can't answer, and my colleagues who are on the call can't answer, we will make sure we get back to you on those.
Andrew, I'm going to interrupt you and say that there probably is a question that I hope you can answer, which has come from Mark Watkin. When you come to any acronyms, if they've not been written and presented in full, can you just say what they are so that we actually understand? And I think there's one that in my ignorance, I'm not going to admit to not knowing what it is, but I'll wait for other people. But if you can just elaborate on the acronyms, please.
I will absolutely do my best on that, Terry. I'm still learning those acronyms 4 years into the job here, but we will keep going. For one of the front there, HFL is Hearts for Learning, as I'm sure it is evident. So I would also like to say thank you very much for the kind words that came from you, from Mark earlier about the work that we've been doing. I would like to add my thanks to teams, but also just to say how much the delivery of this work has been about a symbiotic relationship between HCC and HFL. As all of you know, Hearts for Learning is an independent organisation, although its roots are in the County Council. But we do work incredibly closely with the County Council and other public bodies, and I feel that has been a real success through this crisis. So in terms of the work, what I'm going to be talking today, as I say, it's upcoming challenges for schools and support from HFL. Terry has mentioned the Back on Track programme. I will speak about that specifically, but what I'll try and do here is cover a number of areas where we believe schools will be facing challenges and what we're doing. Where some of that has been covered elsewhere, I'll move quickly through it. I'll spend more time on the stuff that is specifically in this presentation. So in terms of, let me try and move on. In terms of the significant challenges that schools are facing, and I'm just going to summarise these now, and then we'll get into the detail of them afterwards, on it one per page. Clearly, the first one is ensuring that schools and settings are open and that we have everyone back in the classroom. The next one is about helping schools with that work around social distancing and minimising the risk of infection. And both of those topics we've already talked briefly about. There's a lot of work that is really helping leaders focus on getting children back on track, which is effectively about making up for lost learning and addressing gaps. And there's a particular focus clearly on cohorts with exams in 2021. We do need to recognise that although schools, many of them did an extremely good job, there are gaps in learning. There are gaps, and they are more significant for the more disadvantaged. There's no doubt about that, particularly those who had less access to technology, and that needs to be addressed in the work that we are doing. We need to continue to work to improve the quality and consistency of digital learning, and that's particularly in the context of preparing for future partial or local lockdowns. And Catherine will talk more about that in detail, but I will cover it briefly. Student and staff wellbeing issues, extremely important. They come from COVID-19, they come from that extended period of home learning. We're supporting on that, and again, some of that has already been covered. The next challenge has clearly been around what I think can only be described as a fiasco over the exams from this summer and the way that grades were decided. We are continuing to support school leaders with any complaints, appeals that are coming out of that process. There are far fewer than might have been the case given where we finally ended up on it, but there are some things that are still going on, and clearly there will be some future exams that will be taking place in the autumn. And then there's also the point about supporting schools with financial implications. We need to think about how the additional money that is, or we need to be helping schools think about how the additional money that is coming from the government is being used, and that's part of the work that we are doing. The final point, which I'll mention, is about supporting governors and senior leaders to plan for the medium and long-term implications of COVID-19. We've given a lot of short-term advice and medium-term advice. There is long-term advice that is also going to be forthcoming. So those are the challenges that we see and that we're supporting schools with. So I'm now going to go through a page on each of those. And I apologise in advance, there is a fair amount of text on each of these. But I will try and pick out the key points. We've already talked about the need to get children back into schools. The initial figures that Simon mentioned are encouraging. We will have a better view at the end of this week as to how well that picture is being seen across the whole of the county. We gave leaders advice about transport and travel arrangements, and we are keeping very close eye on schools, and we're making sure that the County Council and the RSC are being alerted to any schools where there are issues around full opening in September. At this stage, we don't see issues, and none have been particularly brought to my attention as being a major concern. But we will continue to scrutinise attendance levels during autumn term visits, which are planned. And we will also be working closely with early years settings to be making sure that we're keeping an eye on how well they're able to encourage very youngest pupils back into those settings. We will prioritise support there for those that are judged less than good by Ofsted or any concerns. So it's an ongoing process. It's monitoring. It's making sure that the right people are kept informed in the event that we're not seeing that full return to schools. But certainly all of the messaging we're getting from schools, they are very much supportive and wanting all children to be back into education. Social distancing. I think this one was really covered in the debate about, well, what's the right size of bubbles? It really does depend in every single school and setting what is right for that school and setting. It depends on the physical space. It depends on the size of the cohorts. Schools are having to make their own choices here. There is a lot of work being done, or has been done in schools. We are continuing to assist with queries regarding issues such as the wearing of face masks. Clearly, the government advice on that has now changed, and certainly in more public areas, some schools are encouraging all pupils to wear face masks in those public areas. It's different in different situations. I think a lot depends also on the age profile of teachers and professionals in schools. My wife is a teacher at Watford Girls Grammar. That is a school where there's a fairly old cohort of teachers, and I think there are several there who are choosing to wear masks. I think as much as anything because it does give a sign to say they are really trying to make sure that they engage in social distancing. We will use the autumn visits as an opportunity to assess how social distancing arrangements are working in practice in schools.
Andrew, I'm very sorry to interrupt you. Mark has asked a question and I can't give him the answer. I should be able to. On the previous slide, DSEAs.
Right, sorry, District School Effectiveness Advisors. So in our primary, as you know, we have 400 primary schools across the whole of the county, and the way that we manage that is effectively within our organisation. We have a school effectiveness advisor who takes responsibility for managing all of the HIPs for Hertfordshire Improvement Professionals who work in each district. So a district school effectiveness advisor is effectively a more senior HIP. It is they are permanent employees of Hearts for Learning, and they manage the work and have overview of all of the primary schools within districts. That is, we don't have that same setup for secondary schools and for special schools, just because they're smaller numbers and they can be managed more across the whole county.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
And apologies, I missed that acronym.
That's all right.
So supporting leaders to get the curriculum back on track, which is about making up for lost learning and addressing the gaps. We will be doing, so autumn visits are going to be very focused on the curriculum. How are leaders assessing learning and the gaps that emerged? How are programs of study being adapted to incorporate key learning not covered during the lockdown? What are the plans for catch-up, mentoring, intervention lessons, support from tutors, etc. This applies across all the phases. Early years visits are also about supporting leaders to evaluate the support for the most vulnerable learners and ensure that year one provision recognises the need to adapt pedagogy and effectively supporting that return to the classroom learning environment, which is one of the biggest challenges we have. We already know that the summer holidays is often a period where learning is lost and needs to, and that sort of the discipline of being in the classroom needs to be re-established in September. That's more important now than ever, and it's more important now than ever for younger kids. At the secondary level, we have a programme leading after lockdown next steps, supporting leaders in making informed curriculum choices and support from re-engagement of students to address the demands of the exam series for 2021. We're obviously waiting to hear whether the government does ask for those exams to be pushed back to later in the summer term. There are pros and cons to that. I don't think we need to get into that. A decision will eventually arrive, and we will support schools whatever that decision turns out to be. We're also trying to make sure we support middle and senior leaders in ensuring work is assessed accurately. And that's very important in the event that there's a centre assessed grading process for 2021. So if exams don't happen, or there's a continuation where school assessment is a part of awarding the exams next year, we need to make sure that middle and senior leaders in schools are ready for that. Clearly, there will be a particular focus in secondary schools on new 11 and 13 cohorts. And we also will be continuing with our HFL revision hub provision come next spring. This is where I would like to talk on the next slide about the Back on Track programme for primary schools. This is a package of CPD, continuing professional development, resources and support. It's rooted in very detailed research and coming from the expertise in our teams. We put a lot of work over the summer term into developing this. We identified early on that there would be a major challenge across primaries to allow children to catch back up, and that the work would be needed. So our teams, as they weren't able to be out in schools delivering the support they would need to, we invested a significant amount of time to develop a new package of support to go out to schools and support them with their learning. It is a traded package, although I'll talk in a moment about the additional support that HCC is providing on this. How does it meet schools' needs? It's curriculum facing. It ensures learning is carefully structured. It's supporting teachers so that pupils meet at least the age-related standards by the end of the academic year. That's what we're trying to do, is get them back to where they should be. It's very much focused on English and maths, as you might expect, a wide range of tools, guidance, resources. There's also an assessment piece to it. We're also a package of support for pupils in transition to their new year group, particularly when they're moving through key stage. We also have an early years offer in planning for effective delivery of curriculum response through early years foundation stage pedagogy. The products, there's an assessment product, which includes, there's a mixture of digital and consultancy and resources throughout all of these programs. Schools can choose to buy as much or as little as they see appropriate. Clearly, we work for schools to help them identify where we believe that it is the right thing to do. As I mentioned, there's assessment, there's English and maths, there's early years. We are also delivering some work in science, modern foreign languages. The wellbeing piece was developed, but is to a certain extent replaced by the work that the funding that the government has made available on a much wider basis for wellbeing. How do schools fund the programme? What's very clear here is that the government funding that's been made available to schools, £80 per pupil, to help that catch-up premium can be used towards this, and so that they can be using that funding to help pay for this. The actual costs of a programme here. We're talking about £1,000 to £1,500 for a full maths package, for example. That is a significantly, it doesn't use up a very large proportion of that £80 per pupil. I'll talk more about small schools in a minute. What we have also offered schools to do, go back, is to use some of their existing contracts to offset the cost of some elements of the programme. This is to enable schools to say, well, look, actually, I can't make the best use of what I would normally have a visit from one of our consultants, so I will put some of that cost towards the cost of this programme. We've had to create a careful balance here because clearly we need to make sure that HFL is sustainable and that we are also able to defray the costs that we've invested in this, but we believe that getting that balance right is the right one. I would like to highlight the fact that HCC have agreed to fund a full set of early years maths and English packages for small schools, that is schools below 120 pupils, and to match fund the purchase of packages in schools which are on the Keys to Success register, which is for schools where we're most concerned about, or those that are considered vulnerable and facing Ofsted inspections in the next 2 terms. And that, on the behalf of HCC, is a considerable investment of close to 120,000. I think that's particularly appreciated for the small schools because those are schools where the £80 per pupil goes a lot less far. Clearly, a school with only 50 children, 100 children is going to be receiving a lot less than a school with 200, 400 children. And so that support from small schools, I think, is particularly appropriate and was received very well by those schools. We're very excited about the programme. We believe that well over half the primary schools in Hertfordshire will be buying into some or several elements of this programme, and we'll be working very closely with all of those we can do to ensure that each school is choosing to access the content that it most needs to help children get back on track. So the next point is about improving the quality and consistency of remote digital learning and preparing for future and partial lockdowns. Autumn terms will be a discussion around remote learning during lockdown, what worked well, what needs to be improved, and we'll continue to work with schools on that. The expectations from the DFE are very clear about schools needing to be able to deliver what was planned for the classroom and deliver it online. If so, and we'll be, and Catherine will be talking more about this topic in a moment. So I will jump over this slide any further and we can hold any questions on that, please, until Catherine has done her presentation. I think it is important to note that the DFE is funding for all schools the opportunity to get set up on either using Microsoft or Google platforms, which it provides incredibly important basis on which online distance learning can be delivered. And we would very much be encouraging all schools to ensure that they do get that basic level of functionality installed. As I say, that is available to be funded by the DFE. HFL is carrying out a lot of those installs. I think we are the largest installer, certainly in the east of England, if not the UK. We carried out over 100 last term, and we're very happy to carry on doing that for as many schools as wish it. That's from the Google side. The next point is about staff and pupil wellbeing. Our wellbeing team provided support to school leaders throughout the lockdown period. As was mentioned earlier, we tried to ensure that not only that team, but the HIPs, the school effectiveness advisors, the wider HFL teams were available to provide well, face-to-face, I suppose you could call it telephone or video support to school leaders. It was very important. There were some of my leaders who I was worried about were on speed dial from school head teachers, and certainly we're working very hard to support staff as they supported their staff and as they supported pupil well-being. We've already made mention of the funding that's available from the DFE for the Wellbeing for Education Return Initiative, and that work is being supported by Karen Hutchinson and Kate Stockdale from HFL to work in that. We are also delivering additional RSE subject leader sessions, and I'm now going to say I have had a blank about what RSE stands for. It will come back to me in a minute. It's part of the so it will come back to me, and I apologise for that. But there will be a heavy focus on that work on mental health and wellbeing support for staff and students. Moving on, complete the exams this summer. We work very closely to support school leaders during the centre assessed grading process, and then the following process, consultation, appeals. We provided toolkit, sample letters, and so on for effective. We are seeing that there have been concerns raised, and we'll continue to support leaders and governors to help manage that. We're ensuring that key messages around the appeals process and what it means for schools and students are well communicated. We're providing guidance around the parameters of those processes. We're supporting individual schools who request advice dealing with parental concerns. We're liaising with exam board relationship managers to provide guidance and support. We are clearly continuing to liaise closely with HCC, and we are supporting schools to address unintended consequences of teachers' CAGs or moderated results. In some cases, and you may not be aware of this, but the moderated results that came back from the famous algorithm, if they were higher than teacher assessments, then the student got awarded those higher grades. That has resulted in some students getting grades which allow them to pursue an A-level course, which actually might not be they might not well be best suited to do. And that kind of situation we are helping schools deal with, because it is obviously quite contentious, and we do need to be cautious about it. On the other hand, we want to ensure that young people are following the courses that they are best suited to pursue. Financial implications for COVID-19, smart use of additional funding. The teams, the DSEAs, the HIPs, the school effectiveness advisors are all providing regular advice, phone consultations about how best to use additional funding, including thinking how to identify the right students for intervention classes, mentoring, and so forth. We are also working through our financial services teams to help schools look at their budgets. It's clear that some schools will have suffered more because of lost lettings, lost income from wraparound and childcare provisions, cancelled trips, catering costs, and so forth. And also schools where there were restructures planned to reduce costs, those have been placed on hold. I think there is a danger here that schools may take their eye off a little bit off the ball here around finances. It would not be surprising in this situation. And this is something we are going to need to work closely with schools, with HCC, to make sure that schools continue to ensure that they manage their operations in a way that is sustainable in the long term, whilst recognising that there are specific costs that need to be dealt with now in order to ensure that education provision remains as it should do. And then the final point, my final slide here, is around continuing to support governors and senior leaders to plan for the medium and long-term implications of COVID-19. We made sure that the short-term planning, the medium-term planning documents were copied to chairs of governors. our SEAs and HIPs have delivered presentations and provided guidance to governors, and also covering things like, well, the implications of the COVID crisis, the new Ofsted visits, how to support school leaders planning for 2021. Our governance team reinforces all of the support it's giving. We are going to be producing a long-term planning document to complete the series of guidance documents that will be put in place. We are booking speakers for head teacher and senior leader conferences in 2021, which will address the learning from lockdown agenda. I think it's also important to say that we are seeking here to also bring in speakers who will be addressing the Black Lives Matter agenda as well. We, as many of you know, we put a very strong statement out there about what HFL was doing to address, to challenge ourselves on diversity internally, but also how we can support heads and school leaders with what is an incredibly important agenda item as well, going alongside COVID. We expect boards will return to business as usual, but we're monitoring how effectively gaps in learning are identified and addressed in the process, and we'll be supporting governors in that work. And we'll continue to share advice, best practice with governors as we move through the autumn term. There's an awful lot of work that needs to be done, needs to be continued, and the support is there to all aspects of the school community. I think that is my last slide. So I hope I have covered off the acronyms okay there. I hope what I said was clear. Are there any questions?
Well, it's interesting because I think the comprehensive nature of your presentation, and indeed the other presentations, shows up in the fact that there aren't many questions, which is actually a good thing. Mark Watkin did ask a question, and I'll come back to him in a minute, but he has said, did Simon's cost in his presentations include the 120k? It's a large chunk of the costs that you mentioned. I don't know whether that's something you can answer, Andrew, or Simon to answer.
I'm happy to answer and say that there were some visits that were planned for the summer term for schools, which were funded through part of the overall core contract for HCC. We were not able to deliver those for obvious reasons. What Simon agreed with us is that work would be that effectively that money would be repurposed in order to be able to fund that 120. So there is no additional funding. There's not a sort of additional cost implication for HCC. Those visits will take place. Effectively, that cycle of visits will be moving to match the academic year. So the visits that were missed last summer term will be made up for in the next summer term. That will be made up for in next year's funding. So I hope that, Simon, I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that.
No, that's quite accurate.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you, Andrew. Judy.
Thank you very much. I've spent most of this morning being a fairly benign listener, wandering through bits of my house to find best reception and all those difficulties that we're all experiencing. But I was slightly alarmed to hear the bit about the fact that there may be young people who have been sort of over-inspired in terms of their post-16 provision by the grading debacle that we've all lived through. And after a long career as a parent and a grandparent and a further education person, I've long worried terribly about children being put through academic routes when they would do so much better, many of them, through a vocational route. So that was really alarming to hear in 2020. And I just wondered if we've got any idea of the likely scale of that problem. Is there evidence, or is it just a slight niggling worry that we have at the back of our minds?
So I think, Judy, it's a very good point. We would agree completely with you that young people should follow the right route, and we would be encouraging young people to follow vocational routes as much as academic routes where that's possible, and we continue to work with schools in that spirit. I think it would be fair to say that this is a problem that where it occurs, it will be very real, in the sense that for an individual young person who is choosing, who got a adjusted grade of, I don't know, an 8 in maths when the school was expecting a much lower, for them to actually say you shouldn't be pursuing a maths A level is a difficult message and needs to be managed obviously with great care. It's real, it's not widespread, because ultimately the vast majority of young people got the grades that the school gave to them, but there are some where that did happen, and it's important that where that is an issue, that we are supporting schools with it.
Could we have some information maybe at the end of this academic year about that? Is it data that's possible to collect, or is it just too complicated?
Honestly, I don't know the answer to that. I can ask the question, Judy, and I'd be happy to come back and find out. Look, it's something we're aware of. It's anecdotally certainly the case. How widespread, if we're talking, I don't know whether we're talking about just a handful or whether we're talking about hundreds. I don't think it's more than that.
I know, but it's just so dispiriting for that handful when it happens. It's so awful.
I agree completely, and it's a concern, and frankly, it's another own goal by process, because the government did not need to actually apply that bit of saying if the adjusted grade is higher, you get your adjusted grade, because that didn't need to be done. Certainly not at O level anyway. It was different at A level. Sorry, and certainly not the GCSE level.
Did you actually say O level?
I did see O level. That dates me, doesn't it? I apologise. GCSEs.
Oh, excellent. Thank you.
I would imagine that during the course of this year there will be, shall we say, some sensible refinements to the examination process at the end of this year, if they are learning anything from what has gone on previously.
Let us hope so, Terry.
Well, it is of course interesting that Ofqual have had a couple of people from Ofsted actually allocated to them, so there may be a greater level of coordination going forward.
Yes.
Mark, you have a question.
Yeah, sorry to keep asking this question. Very quick one. There's a lot of concern about the gap that may have increased over the last 6 months, and indeed Andrew mentioned it not in passing, he mentioned it on his last slide, and I think earlier as well. I'm not asking for any data at the moment, it's far too early, but I'm sure you'll be wanting this, Terry. It's essential that we do get a proper assessment of the impact of the break in education for our young people, particularly those who come from difficult backgrounds, our own CLA, for example. So I'm just flagging up, please can we have a report on this gap at the earliest possible opportunity when the picture's clear? Yeah,
I think there were two things in a sense. Absolutely, I agree with you. I personally was concerned about the social skills of young people, particularly very young people who during lockdown were confined to their homes. But it does seem that just looking at the school gates and the children, how resilient they are, and they've all, you just get the feeling that to a very large extent they've come back ready for school. They want to go to school, and they're up for it, and hopefully there are not too many downsides to their enforced social isolation. But that's not the same thing as their educational isolation. Although one hopes and I believe that the vast majority of teachers have done a great job in providing education at home during the lockdown period.
Yeah. Terry, can I just jump in there and say, I think, I mean, Mark, you raised a very important point, and I certainly wouldn't want to suggest, I hope no one felt I was glossing over that point. It is absolutely at the core of the Back on Track offer. It's at the core of what we're doing to support schools, is to say, okay, how the young people who have been most disadvantaged during this crisis, how do we make sure that we support them to get back on track as quickly as possible? It is something we're hugely concerned about, and the anecdotal evidence is there that across the country, disadvantaged young people young people who did not have access, the digital divide effectively for kids who did not have access to sufficient technology to be able to learn effectively online is a really serious challenge, and we're going to need to deal with it. I actually don't know the answer about how quickly we're going to be able to have data on that gap and what's happening, because I mean a lot of the data on the gap comes from exams and the end of year, the exams when we actually measure what's happened. And so I guess I am fearful that actual comprehensive data is not going to be available until we do next year's summer set of exams and we know what they are telling us at Key Stage 1, Key Stage 2, GCSEs and A levels. I am sure there will be anecdotal information and other ways that we will be attempting to assess what that situation is, and clearly we'll make sure that we're coming back as soon as we can with more information on that.
And in fact, they anecdotally, and this is not a flippant comment, that there is some evidence of children in class with thumb flipping, like so, where they've spent so much of their summer time playing on their Xboxes and things like that, that they're actually almost programmed to do this now. I'm very conscious that we've spent a great deal of time on these. We've also got the item for education technology, but also Jane Avery has to leave for another meeting a little later. So I'm going to sort of suggest to Catherine that she is as brief as possible so that we can actually pick up Jane's section. But before we do that, we just need to go to the vote on this, if I may. For, against or abstain, please.
Four from me, Terry.
4 for Jeff Jones. Yeah, thank you.
Terry, I can't seem to get to my chat line, so
okay. Do we take you as a what do we
4,
take you
please.
as, Richard?
Yeah, 4, please. Yeah.
4. Richard Thake.
Having said that, I promptly found it and have actually voted, so don't take it.
You only get 1. I think I can probably say with some level of confidence that is a majority, but I'll just wait.
Can Richard please be told that this isn't a matter of vote early, vote often?
It was an absolutely inability to get to the type of new message because something had appeared over the top of it. So I did admit it.
Majority agreed. Right. I'm just before we move on, I'm going to ask Catherine Tallis. Catherine, how long do you need?
Terry, I'll be as brief as I can. So I think
give me a clue. Could you?
I'm sure we could get through it in 5 minutes.
Oh, okay. Carry on. Okay. Welcome. Do you want to introduce yourself, Catherine?
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Catherine Tallis, the Director for Business Services at Hearts for Learning. So obviously you've just heard from Andrew about frontline learning in the classroom. My directorate is all about sort of making resources in schools as efficient as possible and the back office as efficient as possible so we can invest as much as possible into the frontline teaching and learning. So within my directorate is a technology. Not moving through the presentation for some reason. Oh yeah, okay. So I just wanted to say a little bit about the team. So we're here, I guess, as an impartial advisor to support schools to adopt the most appropriate technologies. We've had for some time now infrastructural and training expertise, both around cloud and sort of traditional servers in schools, but also digital classroom offerings. So Office 365 for Education and Google Classroom, which were effectively the backbone for online offerings during lockdown, certainly in secondary schools. I just wanted to say that when we talk about EdTech is never effective for EdTech's sake. It goes hand in glove with excellent teaching, and we need to optimise both teaching in the classroom and EdTech to raise student attainment. I think we also need to recognise that as students mature, EdTech holds greater potential. So for secondary schools, it's a lot easier to deliver online learning than it is in early years for obvious reasons. So I think we have to be realistic about what can be kind of delivered at each stage of education. So just where Hertfordshire schools were prior to lockdown, I think this is quite important because I think that the answer is they were at various points, which kind of explains, I think, that the slightly differentiated response to education under lockdown. So in 2019, the DfE published an EdTech strategy, and a number of schools were starting to move in line with that strategy, which talked about cloud-based digital education provision. In February at HFL, we held a big technology in school showcase. About 200 schools came along, and it was really interesting. We had some seminars and we talked to schools about their technology strategy, and there was a definite willingness on the part of schools, but a kind of lack of capacity in many to have a technology strategy. So I'm conscious that lots of schools had school development plans, plans to invest in buildings, but IT had been kind of left behind. And I think that's partly because of the financial pressures schools have been experiencing over a number of years, and it hadn't been a priority area. It's safe to say that a handful of schools in Hertfordshire were trailblazers and further along the journey than others, and actually the transition into online teaching and learning and distance learning was a lot easier for those schools. For everybody else, I think it felt a bit like a scramble at the time, and there was an overwhelming number of free apps and free programs available to schools, and I think a lot of schools initially felt quite overwhelmed by the market offers out there. So effectively, you'll remember back in March, it was a kind of pretty much overnight lockdown with very little notice to school leaders, and suddenly they had to deliver distance learning programs to the majority of their pupils. For many, that meant adopting some kind of platform. So that was clearly an initial challenge. I think it's fair to say that many teachers lack confidence in digital skills required to enable video contact with students. And I think we learned through the process that where there wasn't video contact, we saw early disengagement. So if you're sat at home receiving worksheets from your teacher and you don't actually hear from your teacher directly after 2, 3, 4, then turned into kind of 10 weeks, and longer, that becomes really difficult for young people. Andrew's alluded to the divide between students in terms of access to devices and connectivity. So we're aware that a number of students didn't have wireless at home and weren't able to access the internet to access their online curriculum. There's also a number of households that had one device to many children, and also parents who were needing to use devices to work in the day, meaning that when lessons were delivered synchronously in real time, it could be quite hard for some students to access those lessons. So we know the digital divide was a big issue initially. Clearly, HCC benefited from the government funding for year 10s and children looked after around disadvantaged devices, but that didn't cover everybody out there without access to a device or connectivity. Students were obviously in a wide range of learning environments. Some had both parents working full-time flat out, trying to save businesses and therefore little time to invest in them. Some were fortunate enough to have qualified teachers as parents with kind of who'd been furloughed, who were able to spend sort of that one-on-one time with people. So there was a huge kind of variety in the environments children were in. Many platforms were pushed beyond their intended purpose. So if we go back to this idea that great teaching and learning comes first, and then you use kind of education technology to consolidate learning, we were doing it the other way around. So we were trying to deliver learning concepts through technology, and quite often we were asking too much of these online platforms, and it became very difficult for schools. It's also fair to say that whilst there is no kind of dark art to great online teaching, it's the same as face-to-face, it still requires a significant resource investment to digitise the curriculum. So smaller schools, it was quite challenging to kind of to port their kind of curriculum online, and larger schools tended to fare better here. So as schools kind of prepared to lock down, we at HFL provided a list of commonly used platforms and apps for schools, obviously to try and make sense of the sort of huge array of stuff that was out there. We wrote a series of blogs to help schools make decisions around which technology to adopt, how to produce video content, how to get that kind of daily contact going, and also free training on Google Classroom and Microsoft Teams, which was very well received. In fact, 1,200 teachers were trained on online platforms between March and the end of August, and we published 8 technology blogs. We then followed up. Simon commissioned us to write a distance learning toolkit, which was launched on the 5th of May and ran for 10 editions. That was a weekly bulletin to schools with some original distance learning resources in there to inspire distance learning. It was kind of in the form of PDF articles. We covered English, maths, early years, science, wellbeing, music, thanks to Hertfordshire Music Service, who contributed modern foreign languages and art. So that was a weekly bulletin that heads in Hertfordshire, primary heads, could subscribe to. We had 285 subscribers. We wrote 65 PDF articles and shared them with schools with an open rate of 77% and a click rate of 70%. We should say that in secondary schools, we were sending regular emails, as we were in primary, to subject leaders and heads sharing key resources to inspire distance learning programmes there as well. I think Andrew mentioned that we were #1 on the nationally in the list of Google Classroom installs. You can see Hertfordshire there is the big blue dot, which is something to celebrate. So we had 92 Google installs during the summer term, which kind of greatly accelerates the number of schools with that online capacity. The DfE have launched something called the Platform Provisioning Programme, which enables schools to get either Google Classroom or Office 365 Education installed for free. Now, those two are the kind of leading online classroom offerings and have been kind of, tested for safeguarding, etc. So that's what we're recommending schools use. We at HFL are kind of agnostic. We don't have a preferred platform. We think they're both fantastic. But we were kind of on the list of Google installers, hence we saw a higher number of Google installations, because I think schools saw Hearts for Learning on the list and kind of saw us as a trusted partner, as they wanted to kind of to work with us. I just wanted to say I think it's important that we recognise that there was significant variance in online and distance learning across Hertfordshire. I think that point was made early on, and that was a decision that was made locally, but also depending on where the schools were on their technology journey. It's really important that we stress that online teaching is a change management process. It's not about the technology, it's about the teaching, and we have to make sure that the training is in place so people feel confident, because if teachers aren't confident to deliver online, it's a bit like using Microsoft Teams in a public meeting. It isn't great. So I think schools were quite right not to jump in with both feet for some of these platforms and to be cautious and to kind of go with what they knew, because that also provided continuity for students, which is really important. I think secondary schools, as we've kind of made the point, that weren't already using digital classroom offerings quickly adopted, but that generally in primary schools, online teaching was the exception rather than the rule. Primary schools tended to use online platforms, so they weren't delivering lessons in real time or video or anything else, but they had kind of a number of resources online that children could sort of log on to and complete work in a kind of platform. Purple Mash is the one that's most commonly used in Hertfordshire. I've just made a quick update to this slide because Too Simple, that the owners of Purple Mash had told us that 398 Hert schools were using it. We felt that was a little high, and we've gone back to them. That's them using their products overall. So it's actually 154 schools are using Purple Mash, with 27 accessing it on a free trial. But I think you can see the extent of online learning in that statistic, that usage increased by 122% during lockdown, which represented 43% of use of the platform over its entire lifetime, which is kind of 6-7 years. So I think that gives you a sense of the effort that schools went to get students sort of learning remotely. It's important that we kind of look to the future, and the DfE have been quite clear moving forward that where a class, a group or small number of pupils need to self-isolate, There'll be daily contacts with teachers. That's very different to what we saw back in the summer term. And we think that really is a necessitation of the DfE's provisioning platform provisioning programme. So schools adopting either MS Teams or Google Classroom. So we're going to be having a big push this term on encouraging schools to adopt those offerings. Clearly, if you end up in a situation where you've got some students in the classroom and some self-isolating at home, having the flexibility to record and cast lessons is going to be quite important to be able to meet the needs of all learners. There's a slide here, what should great digital learning look like? It shouldn't look any different to great learning. The two are the same. It's about making sure we're setting challenging, meaningful work, that we've got progression, we're using assessment that's clear and children understand, and we're providing them meaningful feedback. I think what we did see was where schools went for a purely synchronous approach, so teaching kind of online between 9 and 3:30 every day, we saw quite a lot of burnout among students and staff. And what seemed to fare better was a blended approach, where you had sort of real-time teaching, but broken up with some activities that were kind of asynchronous that students could sort of access in their own time. So this sort of seems to be the way forward, and certainly the direction that we'll be supporting schools to move in. Okay, so what we'll be doing this term, we're encouraging schools to look at a digital strategy. I think it's important that schools, when they're adopting these tools, are looking longer term as well, because clearly there's going to be a change in education for the longer term, not just the shorter term. We're going to be encouraging them to adopt a digital education platform, still using the DfE funding, invest in training in digital infrastructure, and use the platform. I think this is the key thing. I think quite often with the lack of digital skills out there, we want to see leaders investing in training and making sure that they are insisting that staff use, and there's sort of nowhere to hide when using these platforms. Update policies to reflect the use of digital education platforms and safeguarding, and plan for supporting those with limited access to technology at home. So we want to see every child with a device and connectivity, and there's no reason why we can't achieve that. Okay, so what we'll be doing with HCC moving forward, we'll be digitising our seminar on developing an effective technology strategy. As I said, publicising the DfE platform provisioning programme. We want to develop a video case study on a school that's invested in a platform to deliver full remote learning programmes. I think just to give schools the assurance that actually once you've got going, it can add real benefit, and it's not something to be afraid of. We'll be having rolling training sessions both on Google Classroom and MS Office for Education throughout the autumn term, and we'll kind of provide a how-to guide for schools. I think there were lots of barriers we saw, particularly among primary schools, to get to online teaching, and we want to kind of provide a how-to guide with a load of checklists that schools can work through in order that they can get to the place where they're ready to deliver online. We aspire to deliver masterclasses and digital delivery, but I think, in all honesty, there'll have to be a traded offer. I think we have a vision for the future of having a traded ed tech offer as part of the broader HFL education offer. And it's also important to mention Sandringham School here, who are one of the DfE's EdTech demonstrator schools. So they have been commissioned by the DfE to work in the locality as a kind of reference school, and Sandringham have done some great work, and we're working with them on that programme. So we'll be strengthening that link as we move forward. Okay, any questions?
There we go. How about that for a whistle stop? Richard Thake asked a question. 285 subscribers infers that 115 did not, and do we have a handle on how those who went their own way, their own route, managed against the client base who retained HFL?
So at the moment we don't. I think it was very important to give schools the space during the summer term to get their heads around the operational challenges they faced. As the HIPs, the Hertfordshire Improvement Partners, go into schools, both primary and secondary, in the autumn term, we'll be having these conversations, and it will be key to those conversations to ensure that schools have proper provision for online teaching. Now, obviously, the schools that don't engage with HFL, it's a bit more difficult to have that conversation with. But I think where we're aware that's an issue, we'll be kind of working with Tanya and Simon to ensure that we are holding those schools to account.
I am not seeing any other questions, so I shall take it and say, on behalf of all panel members. Thank you very much indeed, Catherine. And thank you to everybody from HFL. It's been absolutely enlightening and hugely educational and very valued. On that basis, can we vote, please, to note and comment on the item? Thank you.
Are we noting, Terry, or are we voting? I'm basically voting for. You're muted, I think, Terry.
Terry, we didn't get your reply because you were muted.
I think you're muted, Terry.
Oh, apologies, very strange. I said you were voting.
Correct, voting for.
Voting for, and there is a majority agreed. Thank you all very much indeed. Let's now move swiftly, please, to Jane and Andrew, and I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves for item 7, a return to school, home to school transport arrangements for September 2020. And there was, of course, a paper in your pack for this, which I hope you've had an opportunity to read. So, Jane, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, Jane Avery, Strategy and Policy Manager for Admissions and Transport within Children's Services.
Hello, I'm Andrew Highfield, Head of Integrated Transport Unit within Environment and Infrastructure.
You want to introduce your report, please?
Yes, absolutely. I'm just going to, Andrew and I and colleagues across the County Council have been working very closely since the beginning of July on planning homeschool transport for the return of schools in September. We've had government guidance issued on the 11th of August, and the same week we had £1.1 million worth of government funding guaranteed for the first half of the autumn term to support additional capacity and traffic management strategy in that first half to ensure the majority, well, all of our pupils can access school safely. Within our working group, we've been focusing on special schools and secondary schools, as that's where most of our young children and children are transported. The report breaks down the work that we've been undertaking across several different sectors: local authority transport, public transport, and active travel. On local authority transport, social distancing hasn't been required, and therefore we aren't social distancing on that transport, which is just for pupils and young people only. We have split out our e-routes, so they are just going to individual schools, whereas normally they run by 2 or 3 schools. Our special educational needs transport is also running as normal, but there has been significant work with operators to minimise the risk of all pupils travelling on local authority contracted vehicles. Significant improvements and hygiene have been put in place, deep cleaning routines, active loading and unloading of pupils to try and ensure that pupils sit in the same seats and sit next to the same people, minimising passing in vehicles, the use of masks, sanitizer and ventilation, just to minimise the risk to pupils travelling on homeschool transport. On public transport, which is massively used across the county, we have 16,000 Saver Card users in Hertfordshire and 113 public bus routes used for schools and college access. We've done, well, colleagues in Andrew's department have done a huge amount of work studying the pupil loadings of those busiest routes, and we have 41 additional duplicate vehicles running on those routes to again maximise pupil travel and to minimise the interface between pupils and the general public when going to work. Those duplicates are clearly signed and where possible are running in front of the standard service so pupils can access those quickly and easily. The active travel team has been very active over the summer and the beginning of this term, with Park and Stride presentations sent to all schools. 600 cycling queries have been tackled, walking bubble maps produced for schools, and apps distributed to encourage independent travel. Your members are probably aware of the county-wide communications campaign around homeschool transport, which has been embedded within the Return to School campaign that's been running since the middle of August and is still going at the beginning of September now. The emphasis on that campaign for transport is around safe travel, and there's been lots of social media, radio adverts, posters at bus stops and on buses about how to travel safely, the use of masks, the use of sanitizer, hand washing, etc. We've also ensured that we've specifically contacted all schools, all entitled families and all Saver card holders around our plans for transport, around expectations and around safe travel. There will be additional communications sent out today, this afternoon, to promote the use of the duplicate vehicles that have been put on across the network. So what's been happening since the beginning of term? We've had a daily planning meeting, a 10:30 call, where we're having input from 60 observers that we've got across the county on the ground. They're observers from our active travel team, enforcement officers, and a number of officers from experienced agencies. We're monitoring the usual complaints channels coming into the county council and social media feedback, and getting feedback direct from highways about congestion hotspots. Overall, we're on the 4th day of term really, and operationally it's basically going well. There's 60 duplicate vehicles running across the network, and most of that's going smoothly. We're picking up good feedback and good practice from schools, specifically very good practice by Kings Langley, Barnwell, Sandringham and Knights Templar has been observed. And where we've seen specific issues and noted it, we're going back individually to those schools to discuss what they can do and what we can do to help improve the situation. There has been an increase in active travel, walking and cycling, and our crossing patrols have reported that they're busier than they have ever been. We're working with district councils to refresh yellow lines and zigzags at some hotspots around schools to ensure safety for children and pedestrians. We've had very few capacity issues yet reported on our buses. There's increasing numbers reported this morning at Queen's and Nicholas Breakspear, and we'll be monitoring that situation very closely and putting on additional vehicles if necessary. We hope that more children will be using buses as the weeks progress, as parents and families become aware of the additional capacity that's been put on across the network. We haven't had any specific issues around travel to our special schools. There have been the usual issues and complaints at the start of term, no more than usual, but again, that's being very carefully monitored. So if there's anything generic, we can pick it up quickly. Schools have been given a specific contact email address so they can quickly raise any home to school transport issues, and we're feeding back on a daily basis to senior managers and the DFE. So that's where we are briefly, and I'm sure there might be questions. Andrew, did you want anything to add anything on that?
Just a couple of points really quickly, if that's okay. So other thing I just wanted to mention was we repurposed some of our internal vehicles as well to try and support this operation. So there's some adult social care vehicles running on an education route, for example, and we've also kept some on standby in case we need to tweak our operation at short notice. So that's been really positive. In terms of our duplicates, I know you mentioned, Jane, that was a really substantial operation and procurement operation to get in place very quickly. So we had to work with a number of bus and coach operators in the area who put in bids, and then obviously get the operation right to be out on the ground for that. And I think the third thing I just want to mention, as you touched on it, Jane, is the observers have been really useful in getting us intelligence from a network. We were able to do that through some of the funding that came from DFT for travel demand management. And with the other measures we put in place, that's proved really useful so far to get intelligence back so we can tweak what we need to do for the network.
Thank you very much indeed, both. I think what I know we've got a couple of questions in the pipeline. I would just say to colleagues that we are talking about home to school transport arrangements. We're not talking about any highways remodeling arrangements. So if you have any questions about those, the Highways Cabinet Panel is the place to be, not here. And on that comment, we'll start with Judy.
Thank you, Chair. I wouldn't dream of talking about highway restructuring management, whatever. Wouldn't dream of it. And normally I frown very heavily upon people who bring their casework to cabinet panels, which is meant to be strategic. But since we're being very detailed today, I have picked up a problem about public transport, bringing children from Letchworth to Hitchin for Hitchin Boys School. What do I do with such an issue? Children not getting on 2 or 3 buses because they're already full, that sort of stuff. Where should I be taking that?
I think directly to us, Judy. We did have one issue reported for a child going to Hitchin Boys on the first day of term, but we contacted the school and they said they haven't had any issues since. But if you can,
yesterday, yeah.
If you can let us know specifically around the route numbers and potentially even the bus stops, we'll ensure that's monitored by the enforcement team and check out if people genuinely aren't getting to school with the schools.
Okay, thanks very much indeed.
Thank you. Nick Hollinghurst.
Thank you. Yes, this is perhaps a general point which may apply in other rural areas. We've only been back to school for 4 days, as you mentioned. I've already had 2 complaints about the traffic speeds. Now, in the rural areas, of course, there are sort of gathering points.
I can't hear anything.
And it's difficult. They're finding it difficult to get across the roads to these gathering points. Because there seems to be a general increase in speed of vehicles in rural areas, which parents feel is dangerous. And I've even had one person say they wouldn't want to do it, but they might have to go back to taking the child to school in the car, which is not what we want. Has anybody else had any complaints of this nature? And do you think it's something that ought to be brought up with the constabulary?
I mean, we haven't had any specific feedback around traffic speed. There's been issues obviously around congestion hotspots, but nothing around speed. I think the only thing that we could do at the moment is flag that with our highways colleagues and potentially have, Andrew, an enforcement officer in the area to actually look at traffic speeds, to look at the safe crossings.
Yeah, I know highways colleagues were looking at getting more quantitative data as we go in terms of traffic patterns. I'm not sure if that will include speeds, but we can definitely take away that specific issue and look what we can do.
What I would say is if there's a specific area that Nick is referring to, then it might be appropriate to contact the local police who may be interested in that.
I am doing that, of course.
Yeah, okay.
Sorry, Terry, could I just ask that if there's specific details, i.e. specific, bus stops or villages, if you could let us know so we can target our monitoring.
Got that.
Okay. Annie Brewster asks, can these 60 observers identify if children are keeping within their bubble group on buses?
There aren't bubble groups on buses, basically. So that would be a no.
No. Mark, comment out and about initial less traffic evidence of more walking.
Yes.
I think you've already mentioned that there has been an increase in walking to school, which is good. Even if it's only to the fact that if any of the parents have parked, say, half a mile away to avoid the congestion around the school gate, and the children are walking the last half mile, that's actually a bonus, I would suggest, particularly in those schools where they're coming from further afield. Anthony Rowlands has got to leave for another meeting. We don't have to answer that one. And that is it.
Terry,
so I think.
Terry, could I say something? Terry?
Who's that?
It's Jeff Jones.
Jeff, yes.
Yeah, sorry, because my chat
Yeah,
isn't working.
carry on.
Hold on, I better put my camera on. Regarding school transport, I did visit our on the first day our local schools in Buntingford in my division, and just to say really that chatting with the drivers etc. all seemed to be going very well there. There was quite a congested area up by Freeman School, but teachers tell me that this is quite normal there. Interestingly, I just wanted to know if you were aware. I'm sorry to make this a little bit parochial, but Jane and Andrew, I just wonder if you are aware that we've got a new turning circle that was specifically put in Buntingford for school buses. Very nice, put in by the developer. Unfortunately, because it ties in with the new road going across to the A10, and we were specifically requesting that for school buses. It was really hoped that that was supposed to be up and running, ready for the schools coming back in September. But there's been a delay highways wide on that. But just wanted to make you aware that is available. There is another route into it that could save some congestion, and I'll be happy to possibly, if you want to take that up further, you could look at it, because the turning circle is all ready for it, and there is a short footpath about 100 metres for the kids to walk along. All good for health. Thank you,
Jeff. I think Jane has heard that, and indeed I would imagine that Pauline Davis, who I think is probably already on the line as well, will have heard that in terms of the highways and the completion of that work. So it may be something that there can be an added conversation. But Jeff, if you'd like to pick up separately with Jane on that particular local issue, that would be ideal, I think.
Yeah, thanks very much.
Asif, you've indicated, I hear you would like to speak.
Yes, thank you. My question is actually, I'm positive to hear that students pupils, young people are beginning to walk to school. My question is actually related to, it's going to get darker in winter days, and some of these passages, I can think of my son's school, isn't going to be well lit, or it's slight rural, and just about safety and student safety coming and walking to school and coming back to school, and messages from school itself to these young people is to about safe ways of walking home. As a parent, I would certainly be worried if my young ones started walking back, and at that age, and these teenagers, they can walk and walk and walk, but it needs to be in a safe way, and those type of messages as well, because they've forgotten to wear their high vis clothes and their black blazers coming back, when it's dark and so on. So I just wondered that yes, walking needs to be encouraged, but also the safety messages that go along with walking to school and back.
Jane, would you like to pick that up?
I think it's probably something for Anne Hardy's active travel team. They promote safe walking, and I'm sure they've got guidance for schools and parents around how to promote safe walking to and from school, as well as using the apps to find safe walking routes. And
possibly if Asif can let Anne Hardy know the school in particular, maybe there could be some sort of particular education by the school for the children.
It's Queen's School, which is one of the biggest schools.
Queen's.
And there's certain routes down Bushy Mill Lane, and where there's no footpaths or anything like that, no street. I do see students walk that route with cars coming down, blind bends and things like that. So it's about safety.
Nobody else is indicating. Jane, thank you very much. I know, because I've been involved with this, and we've been having weekly meetings to make sure that we're ahead of the game and absolutely up to speed. And I think that I would have to commend you and Andrew and all your colleagues in both the educational admissions team and the environment and transport team, because this has actually been a really good example of collaborative working, and I think the end result of that has been a very successful operation, and one which I know has been referenced in higher places than even in Hertfordshire. So well done to both of you, and thank you. So we need to actually
Thank you, Terry.
Sorry?
Thank you.
You're very welcome. We need to vote on it, please. If you can vote in the normal way. Jeff, I'm going to guess that you're going to say yes.
Most definitely, Terry. It's a yes.
I can't even get in.
You're looking very worried, Terry. What's the matter?
No, there were just so many people voting for, which was really good. I couldn't actually get my vote in, but I have done now.
I'm glad Caroline.
Look at that, unanimous. Well done. Thank you very much
I'm
indeed.
glad Caroline Clapper picked up her typo because she put fort originally.
Okay, right. Let's move on rapidly because I do want to get through this. We've got three more items. Hopefully, I'm going to say now that I hope they won't be contentious. The first one is the proposal to alter the way that primary behaviour support services, including intensive short-term schooling provision for pupils at risk of exclusion, are delivered in the borough of Broxbourne. To present it and going to introduce herself of themselves are Pauline Davis and Richard Woodard. So if you'd like to do that and introduce yourselves and tell us who you are and what you do. Thank you.
Chair, my name is Pauline Davis. I'm the head of school planning for Hertfordshire County Council, and my colleague is.
Good morning, Richard Woodard. I work for Integrated Services for Learning, and my job title is County Lead for Access and Inclusion.
So today we're reporting on the response to a consultation initiated by the Director of Children's Services to alter the primary behaviour services in Hoddesdon. The proposal is for the support to primary pupils to be commissioned from the local education support centre, which will require a change in its age range. As a consequence, the primary support base currently located at the Andrews Lane Primary School site would need.
Oh, shall I take over?
I think we've lost Pauline, so if you can take over, Richard, please.
Yeah, consequently, the primary school base currently hosted at Andrews Lane Primary School will need to be closed, and a new service started based at the Rivers ESC in Hoddesdon. This is in line with what we have done previously in both Dacorum and St Albans, as you may recall, in the last 18 months.
I think it's fair to say also that since September 2019, and there is a paper which I'm sure colleagues have already read, there have been no children receiving intensive short stay schooling at Andrews Lane Primary School. So the move, it does seem to make sense to move it to the Rivers. And it is, I just want to check one thing, if I may. How in the respondents' notes, there seemed to be a little bit of a hesitation from the Chair of Governors at Andrews Lane Primary School on the basis that she wasn't able to agree at that time with the information, or given the amount of information that she'd got. Has she had more information now, and is she comfortable with the proposal?
Yes, that's correct. So the information was shared with local head teachers, and the review conducted by a group of local primary heads in that area. And when we saw that response from the Chair of Governors, we sent her the outline of the proposed new service and the plan for how that will operate and improve for the children in that area.
I don't know whether Pauline is back with us. I don't somehow think she is. Does anybody have any questions or comments? No? In which case...
Sorry, Jerry, I thought I had put a comment, please.
Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, I beg your pardon. Sorry. Yeah, please carry on.
I promise. As I've now got your attention, just to say I absolutely welcome this. One of my concerns has been about the way we support our children in primary level around the county has varied from ESC to ESC, and I'm proud to say that Chesbrook, where I am on the management committee, has been at the forefront of moving into this area. So I'm delighted to see that Broxbourne will be taking up a very similar approach. I think consistency across the county is a key issue, and I will be giving it my full support. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. As Mark Mills-Bishop has, as a local divisional member, not contentious, supports the paper. Yep, okay. In terms of the vote, what I'd like to do is, if you look at paragraph 3.1 of the papers, there are effectively two options. One is at 3.1, little 1, little 2, little 3 to approve the actions and approve the age range and approve the capital funding for the ESC, or there is 3.1, 4, 5 and 6, which is to take no further action. I'm going to presume from the lack of any objections that you are content to proceed with 3.1, little 2, little 3, and on that basis I would like you to vote for, against or abstain for that recommendation to take it to Cabinet.
Yeah, Terry, happy to support 1, 2 and 3. So that's
Thank you, Jeff.
Okay.
I am going to vote, but you all voted it before me, so I couldn't get in. Oh, well, it was a majority without me. So thank you all very much indeed. That's item 8. We move now to item 9.
Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Now, I'm not quite sure who is going to present this, because Pauline, I think, has disappeared. But I think we have Sam Young with us. And there is a very short item at the beginning of part of this item, which is really just a sort of an introduction to the to a part 2 item, which is going to deal with the finances for it. Simon, you are going to present it. I'm going to start actually by saying that I absolutely welcome this. I think this is a fantastic opportunity, and I hope that my enthusiasm and my support will be replicated across the piece. Sam Young is there, but Simon, you're going to lead on it.
Yeah, I'll just say a very few words on it, and I'm sure if there are questions that Sam is going to be better placed to answer them than me. I mean, the Valley School, I think, is the school in the county which is in the worst condition. I mean, it has too many problems to list, but we're very concerned about our ability to keep it operating for more than the next year or so. So it's our highest priority for a replacement building. We've been looking at a number of options for trying to replace it, including moving it or co-locating it with Barnwell School, which is nearby, as a way of looking for something which might have either educational or financial benefits. But we have concluded that really the best option to pursue is the rebuilding of it on its own site. And that will provide a building which is in a much better condition than it is at the moment. It gives us an opportunity to improve the quality of the accommodation, in other words, its fitness for the use that the school and young people want to make of it, but also to expand its capacity, not greatly, but to a certain extent. So there's some very powerful arguments for doing this. It's an expensive project, and the cost of it is set out in the part 2, which I don't have in front of me. But it's something where we feel that we really need to move ahead as quickly as possible with this project, for fear that the building itself becomes unusable. So it's a high priority to move fast. And for that reason, we have got a provision in the IP for its capital costs. And the report through to Cabinet is, if you like, to confirm the budget allocation to allow us to go ahead with that school. No, we don't normally cover the cost of rebuilding schools from HCC's own resources. And this is one which, to some extent, has slipped through the net, in the sense that schools with major condition problems have in the past mostly been replaced by the ESFA, by the DFE's capital budget programme. But this one slipped through. So one thing that we will do as well is approaching the ESFA to see if we can secure funding from them for the kind of project like this kind of project, which is the sort of project that they should do. But we can't rely on that, and we can't wait on that. We really need to get on with this project, and that's why it's here for your consideration. I see also that Pauline has returned, so we have both Pauline and Sam to add anything if I've missed pertinent points.
I think I would just make 2 points, if I may. One is that time is of the essence in this, because we are actually having to prop the school up almost physically to keep it operating in its current condition, and that is costing us money. So the sooner we can get on with rebuilding it or building a new school, that's all a big benefit. We're hoping that we could actually get this up and running for the autumn of 2022, which would be great, and we can start work, all being well, in the autumn of this year. The other thing also, you'll see at 4.3, there was a question asked of me whether it should be a larger school than the assessed capacity of 165. And Pauline or Sam may wish to comment on this. The current numbers are 153, and the feeling of the school leadership and our educational experts is that 165 is the appropriate size for this school. So did anybody want to comment, either Pauline or Sam or Simon?
That's right, Terry.
So, sorry, was that Pauline?
Yes, you're right, Terry. That is considered to be the appropriate size for this type of school.
Yeah. I am not seeing any questions. Sam, I know you've had a big part of this so far. Do you have anything to add?
No, thank you. Not at this stage, Chair. Other than I think Pauline and I would like to just to say on record that we really appreciate the school community for supporting us through some quite difficult, challenging times in terms of the maintenance of this school, and we hope to be able to bring forward a new school for them as soon as we can.
It's such as hopefully, if it's agreed today and then agreed at cabinet, it's such an exciting project.
Yeah.
So we need to move to part 2. I am now going to move that we do move to part 2 for closed business to discuss the financial aspects of it, and I have to wait until the we're not at a voting point at this stage, by the way, but I have to wait until the Democratic Services people tell us that we are in private mode, so to speak. And it's unanimous. Thank you. Is it on this item, Judy?
No, it's not, Terry.
Okay.
I'd crave your indulgence to ask a question after this item.
Okay.
I love craving people's indulgence. It's a good phrase, isn't it?
Oh dear, I'm delighted to be. Oh no, we're probably on live stream, so I mustn't say anything more. Okay, colleagues, thank you. We are back in the public live stream. You have agreed the recommendation in part 2. Noting that agreement, does anybody wish to make any further comment with regard to part 1 item? Otherwise, we can move to the recommendation. It appears not. So the recommendation is that the panel recommends to Cabinet that it approves a capital project to rebuild the Valley School at a cost of 13.6 million to be funded by the County Council, borrowing of 12.5. No, sorry, no, that's the wrong one. Approves the capital project to rebuild the Valley School.
Support the recommendation.
Terry, my keyboard won't come up. It's locked. I would like to vote for, please. It's Caroline Clapper.
Who's that? Caroline?
Caroline Clapper. My keyboard.
Okay, noted.
Thank you.
And from me, Terry.
Yeah,
for.
Jeff. And that's been agreed with the majority. So that almost brings us to the end of the meeting, but Judy wanted to ask a question. Depending on what the question is, whether you get an answer, I don't know, but by all means, I will let you ask the question on this particular occasion.
Thank you very much, Terry. I actually find Teams meetings of this duration incredibly difficult because I'm not good where I can't see people or speak directly to them. I find Zoom much easier. So if I seem to be asking that we could have had a longer meeting, that's not exactly what I'm doing. There was a lot of presentation material, but I was slightly surprised that we had no updates after all this time from the library service, and also about the COVID use of localities budgets. So I'm just seeking assurance that we will turn to those very important issues at our next Cabinet panel meeting.
Yes, I can give you that assurance, and we will also, I hope, have, if it's relevant at the next meeting, to recognise one of the items in the minutes of the last meeting back in February, and Caroline Cartwright from the LEP to come and perhaps speak at that meeting in October. But what I can say, and we are still obviously in the meeting, I will just say that the reopening of libraries on a phased basis is proceeding, and we are getting there, but it's not an easy job, but we appreciate everybody's forbearance, including colleagues, members, public and library staff.
Thank you very much.
Judy, if I can say, you're obviously in the garden, and it's slightly disconcerting because you've got the sun behind you in Hitchin, and so your face is slightly faded, which is a great shame.
Yeah, I had to come out here because of my young puppy, and I was desperately hoping that I was off camera, off audio, at the point at which I said to him, "Do you want me to tickle your tummy?" Because I thought that would not go down very well in the meeting. So I think
barking. I think, bearing in mind that we are still in live streaming mode, I think we will leave it there. Thank you all very much indeed for your attendance.
Quite like politicians to be human as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you very much indeed for your attendance. Thank you for your contributions and your patience, and we will see everybody shortly. Thank you.
Thank you, Terry.